Hey there, tonight we're exploring why you wouldn't last a day in a medieval cathedral, where the extravagant beauty hides biting drafts and the smell of incense barely masks the less-than-holy realities of chamber parts and cheese-filled diets. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You jolt awake to the sound of bells ringing with an enthusiasm that should be illegal at this ungodly hour. It's dawn in the medieval cathedral, and forget about gently easing into the day. You're catapulted from sleep into the Sama world of stone and silence. The matin service is about to begin, and you're expected to be there, wide-eyed, and pretending you understand Latin. The first thing you notice is the cold. Medieval cathedrals are basically enormous stone refrigerators. You'd think with all that lofty architecture, they could sneak in a fireplace or two, but nope. The builders were more interested in reaching the heavens than keeping your toes toasty. If you thought your drafty apartment was bad, try standing on these stone floors. The chill seeps up through your shoes like it's on a mission to turn you into a human popsicle. Now, about that cloak. You better have a thick one, because central heating is still a few centuries away. Economic reality is that warming these cathedrals would cost a fortune, and medieval folks had other priorities, like war or buying more land. You might get a brazier or two for the wealthy clergy, but otherwise, it's just you, your cloak, and your rapidly numbing extremities. As you shuffle towards the choir, take a moment to look up. Those dizzyingly high ceilings aren't just for show. The medieval obsession with reaching the heavens was partly a spiritual thing, sure, but it was also a flex. These cathedrals were the skyscrapers of their day, each one trying to outdo the other. Take the Amiens Cathedral, for example, with its nave vault reaching up to 42 meters. That's about 138 feet for those of you keeping score at home. That's taller than a 13-story building. Feeling small yet? Good, because that was kind of the point. The grandeur and magnificence were supposed to make you feel humbled, mere speck in the grand scheme of God's creation. And maybe, just maybe, you cough up a few extra coins for the cathedral's upkeep. It's all about that divine awe with a little side of economic strategy. But back to the matins. It's a service that starts in the pitch black of morning, and it's long, like really long. You're looking at a couple of hours of chanting and praying. The monks have been up since midnight. Clearly, coffee wasn't invented yet, because who does that voluntarily? But hey, if you're lucky, there might be some Gregorian chant to keep you awake. It's like the medieval version of a podcast, but instead of true crime, it's all about salvation and eternal damnation. And while you're trying not to nod off, consider this. These cathedrals took decades, sometimes even centuries, to build. Chartres Cathedral, for instance, took about 30 years to complete its main structure, and that's considered fast for the time. Imagine starting a project knowing your grandkids might be the ones to finish it. They built with a future mindset we can barely fathom today. It's like the ultimate long-term investment with a side of divine cred. Now, let's debunk a little myth while we're at it. You might think these cathedrals were packed to the rafters with pious souls every single day. Not quite. Sure, they'd be full on feast days and Sundays, but during the week, attendance was more like a modern Monday morning yoga class. The real draw was the spectacle of the building itself and the services that offered a break from the harsh realities of medieval life. As you finally emerge from the matin service, you'll notice the light filtering through the stained glass. These windows weren't just pretty pictures. They were the medieval equivalent of graphic novels, telling biblical stories to the mostly illiterate masses. The use of color and light wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about education and inspiration. And yes, maybe a little bit of showing off. So, you've survived the morning in a medieval cathedral. You've learned that grandeur often trumps comfort, and that spiritual architecture is as much about status as it is about sanctity. But don't get too cozy. The day is just beginning, and there's plenty more medieval madness waiting as you venture further into this stone-cold wonder. So, as you step out of the matin service, shaking off the chill and the early morning grogginess, let's talk about the medieval cathedral's version of Who's Who. The hierarchy here makes the corporate ladder look like a kiddie slide. At the top of this ecclesiastical pyramid sits the bishop, whose throne, yes, throne, dominates the cathedral like a medieval CEO surveying his empire. The bishop wasn't just any holy man, he was the medieval equivalent of a power broker. His seat wasn't merely symbolic of spiritual leadership. It was a literal high seat, often elevated so everyone could see who's boss. And it wasn't just about looking down on the congregation, though that was a nice bonus. It was about the bishop's role as a political player, with the power to influence both church and state matters. Being a bishop was akin to wearing a crown made of both divine and worldly influence. But don't be fooled into thinking the bishop's life was all about prayer and piety. Oh no, there was plenty of political maneuvering happening behind those stone walls, more Game of Thrones than Sunday school. Bishops could be kingmakers, power shakers, and sometimes, well, just plain troublemakers. They wielded influence not only through their spiritual duties, but also through their connections with the nobility and royalty. They were the ultimate networkers, working the medieval LinkedIn before it was cool. Descending from the bishop's lofty perch, we meet the canons. These guys were the bishop's right-hand men, tasked with managing the cathedral's daily operations and ensuring everything ran smoother than a Gregorian chant. Think of them as middle management, but with better robes and perhaps a bit more gravitas. They kept the lights on, figuratively speaking, of course, since actual lights were still a few centuries away. Then there were the subdeacons, who were essentially the cathedral's interns. They had the grunt work of preparing the altar, assisting with services, and generally doing whatever was needed to keep the place from descending into chaos. And let's not forget the choir boys. They might have looked angelic, but they were the medieval version of rock stars, providing the soundtrack to your spiritual journey. Their high-pitched voices weren't just for show. They were an integral part of the service, providing a heavenly contrast to the deep tones of the adult choir. But all this divine drama didn't come cheap. Cathedrals were expensive to build and even more costly to maintain. The upkeep was largely funded by tithes, those mandatory donations that made peasants' pockets feel lighter than a feather. 10% of your income might not sound like much today, but in medieval times, it could mean the difference between a full stomach and a very hungry winter. It's no wonder peasants sometimes grumbled louder than a disgruntled worker on a Monday morning. And let's not sugarcoat it. Tithes weren't just a spiritual obligation. They were a financial lifeline for the church. Without them, the cathedral's lofty ambitions would crumble faster than a sandcastle at high tide. It was a delicate balancing act, keeping the cathedral's coffers full while ensuring the peasants didn't revolt. After all, a disgruntled populace was bad for business, even in medieval times. Despite the financial burdens and hierarchical complexities, cathedrals remained awe-inspiring centers of faith and power, their spires reaching for the heavens, while their foundations were firmly rooted in the earthly concerns of politics and economics. They were architectural wonders and spiritual beacons, but they were also a reminder that even in the pursuit of the divine, the earthly realities of money and power were never far behind. So, as you wander through this stone labyrinth, take a moment to appreciate the intricate dance of faith and finance, power and piety. It's a dance that's been happening for centuries, and one that continues to shape our world in ways both seen and unseen. But don't get too lost in thought. There's still much more to explore in this medieval marvel, and plenty more stories waiting to be uncovered. Having unraveled the economic and spiritual intricacies of medieval cathedrals, let's shift gears and tackle a subject that's bound to hit a little closer to home: lunchtime. Or, should I say, the medieval interpretation of it, which is as baffling as trying to understand why anyone would willingly get up at midnight. In medieval times, the concept of meals was less about dining and more about survival with a side of religious observance. Forget your leisurely brunches or power lunches. Dining in a cathedral was a Spartan affair. For monks, the diet was a curious blend of simplicity and monotony. Picture this. Your typical meal might include bread, some form of porridge, and if you were lucky, a strip of salted fish. You see, meat was often off the menu, especially during Lent and on Fridays, because nothing says devotion like a good old-fashioned fast. And monks, bless their pious hearts, adhered to these rules with a kind of zeal that would make a modern dietitian proud or horrified, depending on the day. Fasting was serious business. It wasn't just about skipping a meal. It was about spiritual discipline. And sure, romantic notion of fasting as a pure, holy exercise has its appeal. But let's get real. It also kept the grocery bill down. With the economic realities of the time, it's no wonder monasteries embraced the fasting life. Plus, less cooking meant more time for praying, reading, and let's be honest, surviving in those drafty stone fortresses. Now, if you're wondering about fish on Fridays, that's a tradition with some serious mileage. It's an ecclesiastical loophole, really. The idea was to abstain from flesh meat, which conveniently left fish as the loophole du jour. And because medieval folks were nothing if not resourceful, fish became the go-to protein. This wasn't some newfangled trend. It was established by the early church, and it stuck around like a medieval hangover. You might think the monks had it rough, but the common folk weren't exactly dining in luxury either. The average peasant's meal was a carbohydrate-heavy affair, with bread and pottage, the medieval equivalent of a stew, as staples. Protein was scarce, and vegetables were whatever you could grow or scrounge. The concept of seasonal eating wasn't a trendy choice. It was a harsh reality dictated by the calendar and climate. But let's not pretend that cathedral life was all chanting and chewing stale bread. These stone giants were bustling community hubs, the medieval equivalent of a modern city center. Markets and fairs sprang up around them like mushrooms after a rainstorm, turning the cathedral grounds into a bustling hive of activity. They were the medieval malls, complete with the chaos and commerce that implies. Fairs were the highlight of the medieval social calendar, drawing crowds from miles around. Imagine the scene. Vendors hawking everything from bolts of fabric to livestock, jugglers performing for spare change, the scent of roasted meats mingling with the earthy aroma of humanity. It was a sensory overload, and for many, the only chance to glimpse goods and people from far-off lands. These events were crucial to medieval life, both socially and economically. They were the rare occasions when peasants could trade their wares, hear the latest news, and maybe even haggle their way to a better deal. Barter was king, and currency was often whatever you could trade, whether it was eggs, cloth, or labor. The fairs weren't just about buying and selling, they were about connection, a chance to break the isolation of rural life. But don't romanticize it too much. These gatherings were as chaotic as they were vital. Pickpockets prowled the crowds, disease spread like wildfire, and disputes were settled less with words and more with fists, or worse. It was a medieval marsh pit, and you had to have your wits about you to make it through unscathed. Cathedrals, despite their sacred purpose, were at the heart of this chaos. They were the venues for the fairs, lending an air of solemnity to the proceedings, and they were the backdrop against which the everyday dramas of medieval life played out. It was a dance of the divine and the profane, a balancing act between heavenly aspirations and earthly needs. So, as you imagine yourself wandering through the bustling market, dodging sheep and sidestepping puddles, take a moment to appreciate the cathedral's role in this medieval tapestry. It wasn't just a place of worship. It was the beating heart of the community, a place where life, in all its messy glory, unfolded. And while you ponder the absurdity of fasting monks and fishy Fridays, remember that these traditions, these markets, these cathedrals, they were the fabric of medieval life. They were the threads that connected people to their faith, their community, and their world. It's a legacy that, for all its quirks and contradictions, still resonates today. Stay tuned, because there's much more to uncover as we continue our journey through the medieval cathedral's storied halls. From the artisans who crafted its splendor to the pilgrims who traveled from afar, there are tales yet untold and mysteries still to unravel. So don't hang up your cloak just yet. Our exploration is far from over. As you linger in the cathedral's bustling shadow, still digesting the sensory overload of the medieval fair, you might hear a different kind of commotion echoing through the stone arches. It's not another sermon or the low murmur of prayer. Nope, it's something far more entertaining, the medieval mystery play. Think of it as the original Netflix series, but live, with more angels and demons, and way fewer special effects. Now, these mystery plays weren't just about religious morality. They were the medieval equivalent of a blockbuster, complete with elaborate setups, and occasionally, some unintentional slapstick. Picture this. Scenes from the Bible acted out by local townsfolk who, let's be honest, were probably more interested in hamming it up than delivering a spiritual message. These performances, sometimes spanning multiple days, were a blend of sacred stories and local humor, a cocktail that kept audiences hooked. Imagine the Book of Genesis with a dash of Monty Python. The tradition of staging mystery plays had deep roots in medieval culture, dating back to the 10th century, when the clergy themselves would perform Latin chants to dramatize liturgical events. But by the 14th and 15th centuries, these productions had moved from the confines of the church to the streets, where they were performed in the vernacular and became a community affair. The York Mystery Plays, for example, were a grand spectacle, covering everything from creation to the Last Judgment, with over 48 plays in their cycle. This wasn't just about entertainment, it was education with a side of theatrics. Most medieval audiences were illiterate, so these plays were a visual and auditory Bible study. They were a chance to learn scripture through drama, to see the stories brought to life in a way that sermons and stained glass windows could never quite achieve. And while we're debunking myths, let's be clear, these weren't solemn affairs. Humor was a major component, with devils often portrayed as bumbling fools, drawing laughs and maybe even a bit of reflection on the nature of good and evil. Of course, the success of these productions wasn't just about the script. The acoustics of the cathedral played a starring role. These stone giants were designed to amplify sound, making sure even the guy with the worst seat in the house could hear the angelic choirs, or the not-so-angelic choir boys. You see, those mischievous lads were known to add a bit of their own flair to the performances. Think of them as the medieval version of boy bands, with a penchant for pranks and a talent for turning a solemn chant into an impromptu comedy routine. The choir boys, often recruited from local schools, were trained in music from a young age, their high-pitched voices perfect for filling the cavernous spaces of the cathedral. But don't let those angelic sounds fool you. Behind the scenes, they were known for their antics. Whether it was sneaking out for a forbidden snack or pulling pranks on the unsuspecting clergy, these boys brought a touch of chaos to the otherwise orderly world of cathedral life. And let's not forget the economic impact of these performances. Mystery plays drew crowds, and where there were crowds, there was commerce. Vendors and innkeepers thrived, hawking their wares and offering respite to weary travelers. It was a virtuous cycle of culture and economy, with the cathedral at its heart, proving once again that spirituality and commerce were never too far apart. So, as you take in the spectacle, remember that these plays were more than just medieval entertainment. They were a bridge between the divine and the mundane, a reflection of a society that found joy and meaning in storytelling. They remind us that while the medieval world may seem distant, its love for a good story is timeless. But our day isn't over yet, so keep that cloak handy. The sun may be setting, but the cathedral's story has more chapters left to tell. Whether it's the artisans who carved its intricate stonework or the pilgrims who journeyed for miles to see its wonders, there's still much to uncover in this labyrinth of faith and folly. Stay tuned, because the adventure is just getting started. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the stone floors of the cathedral, you might expect the place to transform into a serene sanctuary of quiet reflection. Well, prepare to have that little fantasy shattered, because in reality, the medieval cathedral at night was less tranquil retreat and more like a medieval version of a dimly lit haunted house. Let's talk about the medieval approach to lighting, or rather, the lack thereof. Picture this. Candles and oil lamps were the medieval answer to darkness, but we're not talking about your cozy scented candles here. These were utilitarian at best, often made from animal fat, and they flickered like a bad fluorescent bulb. The result, a play of shadows that turned every corner into a potential hiding spot for the overactive imaginations of the time. It's a miracle medieval folks didn't all turn into ghost hunters, but then again, they probably had other things to worry about, like not tripping over uneven stone floors in the semi-darkness. Candles were expensive, too. A pound of wax could cost as much as a day's wages for a laborer, so they weren't exactly burning them willy-nilly. Think of it like living in a house where every light bulb costs $10 and burns out in a week. Frugality was the name of the game, and the cathedral's treasury wasn't going to waste precious funds on frivolous illumination when there were bishops' robes to embroider and relics to acquire. But even with this dim ambience, the cathedral had its allure. The flickering lights played off stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the stone walls. It was like medieval mood lighting, adding an otherworldly feel to the place that might have inspired both reverence and a touch of unease. And let's be honest, the medieval imagination was already primed for the dramatic. This setting was less about cozy reflection and more about reminding you of the mysteries of the divine. Speaking of mysteries, the cathedral was much more than a collection of cold stones and stained glass. It stood as a powerful symbol in the broader medieval world, representing not just the church's spiritual authority, but its political and social clout as well. Cathedrals were the epicenters of their communities, towering over towns as a constant reminder of the church's influence. They were a statement of faith carved in stone, but also a testament to human ambition and the medieval obsession with legacy. Take the Notre-Dame Cathedral in Paris, a construction project that began in 1163 and took nearly 2 centuries to complete. Its twin towers reach up 69 meters high, a feat of engineering that continues to inspire awe today. But back then, it was a visible demonstration of the power and wealth of the church, a declaration that the spiritual and temporal realms were inextricably linked. In a time when kingdoms rose and fell with alarming regularity, the cathedral was a rock of stability, literally and metaphorically. This wasn't just about faith, it was about power. The church wielded influence over kings and emperors, often acting as a mediator or a power broker in political disputes. The clergy, especially bishops, were major players in the Game of Thrones long before HBO made it cool. Their reach extended into almost every aspect of medieval life, from laws to education, even to the calendar itself. Remember, it was the church that determined when you could feast, fast, or get married. But don't get too caught up in the romance of it all, because living in the shadow of a cathedral wasn't all divine inspiration and heavenly choirs. For the average medieval peasant, it was a daily grind, punctuated by the relentless demands of survival. The cathedral offered a glimpse of something greater, sure, but it also loomed as a reminder of the tithes and taxes that could make life more difficult than a 3-legged race in chainmail. In the end, despite the grandeur of these stone giants and the lofty ideals they represented, you might find yourself longing for the creature comforts of modern life. Central heating, electric lights, and a cushy couch sound pretty appealing after a day spent shivering on cold stone benches and squinting through candlelit services. Yet, there's something undeniably captivating about the medieval cathedral. It was a place where faith met art, where the earthly and the divine collided in spectacular fashion. These buildings were the heartbeats of their communities, witnessing centuries of human drama in all its messy, glorious complexity. So as you imagine the flickering candles casting shadows on ancient walls, remember this. The medieval cathedral was a monument to the human spirit, a testament to our never-ending quest for meaning, balance, and connection to something greater than ourselves. It's a legacy that, despite the passage of time, remains as powerful today as it was all those centuries ago. And who knows, maybe next time you find yourself in a cathedral, you'll appreciate it with a touch more gratitude and a lot less frostbite. And there you have it, a day in the life of a medieval cathedral. We've debunked myths, unearthed realities, and hopefully left you with a newfound appreciation for the marvels of the medieval world. Just remember, next time you grumble about your electric bill, you could be huddling under a cloak in a stone-cold nave, wishing for just one more candle to light your way. Keep that in mind as you switch on your modern conveniences and enjoy the warmth and light of the 21st century. Because while the past is fascinating, it's also a reminder of just how far we've come. In the waning years of the Tang Dynasty, it seemed like everything that could go wrong did. Think Game of Thrones, but with more silk robes and fewer dragons. It was a time of chaos, with regional warlords carving the empire into their own personal fiefdoms like a pizza at a frat party. The Tang, once a mighty dynasty that ruled China for nearly 3 centuries, had a downfall that felt like watching your favorite band split up over creative differences and too many after-parties. Enter Zhao Quanjian, a man whose dreams were as big as his military boots. Born in 927 AD, he was a general with a knack for not just surviving the political whirlwinds, but thriving in them. By 960 AD, he decided that if no one else was going to bring order to this chaotic buffet of power grabs, it might as well be him. So, with a cunning plan and the kind of confidence that only comes from years of leading troops and strategizing in the field, he launched the Song Dynasty, proving that sometimes the best way to start a new chapter is with a bit of audacity and a lot of strategic foresight. Now, how did Zhao Quanjian pull off this impressive feat? Well, it wasn't just about swinging swords and shouting orders. It was about playing chess when everyone else was playing checkers. One of his early genius moves was the infamous cup of wine incident. Imagine a scene straight out of a spy movie. Zhao, surrounded by his generals, pours the wine and casually suggests they all retire from military service to live in comfort and luxury. It's like telling your co-workers, hey, how about we all quit and start a band? Except they actually did it. This clever maneuver ensured that none of his powerful generals decided to play a Game of Thrones themselves with the empire. By neutralizing potential rivals, Zhao solidified his power base, proving that sometimes the pen, or in this case the wine cup, is mightier than the sword. But securing the throne was just step one. Zhao knew that to maintain power, he needed more than just a loyal army. He needed a well-oiled bureaucratic machine. So, he set about creating a centralized bureaucracy that would make any modern manager weep with envy. This wasn't just a matter of shuffling papers and appointing cronies. It was an intricate system designed to ensure loyalty, efficiency, and, importantly, tax revenue. Because let's face it, running an empire is expensive, and nobody wanted to be the broke dynasty that couldn't pay its soldiers or keep the lights on. Figuratively speaking, of course. And then there were the court robes, a seemingly trivial detail that spoke volumes about the changing times. The Song court was all about style, and their fashion choices were a far cry from the military garb of their predecessors. Flowing silk robes became the norm, each color and pattern a symbol of rank and status. It was a sartorial statement that said, "We are a cultured and sophisticated bunch, thank you very much." But more than just fashion, these robes represented a shift towards a more civil, less militaristic society. Zhao Quanjian's establishment of the Song dynasty was more than just a power grab. It was a masterclass in statecraft. By consolidating power, placating potential rivals, and establishing an efficient bureaucracy, he laid the groundwork for what would become one of China's most prosperous and innovative eras. It was a time when the nation would not only get its groove back, but would also set the stage for technological and cultural advancements that would resonate through history. As the new millennium approached, the Song dynasty was poised to turn the chaos of the past into the prosperity of the future, proving that sometimes all it takes to change the course of history is a little wine, some silk, and a lot of strategic thinking. So, as the Song dynasty strutted into the scene with silk robes flowing and a centralized bureaucracy tighter than a drum, the economy was about to get its groove on. Enter stage left, the invention of paper money. Now, before you start picturing ancient Chinese folks standing in line at an ATM, let's unpack this. Paper money was a revolutionary concept, financial innovation that made lugging around strings of heavy copper coins as outdated as using faxes in the age of email. This wasn't just a convenience. It was economic sorcery that transformed trade and commerce across the empire. First introduced around 1023 during the Northern Song period, paper money was a game changer. The government, flexing its newfound administrative muscles, issued these bills to make trade more efficient. Imagine trying to buy groceries with a 1,000-pound sack of coins. Not fun, right? Paper money allowed for large-scale transactions without the need for an ox-drawn cart just to move your cash. It was like discovering Venmo when all you'd known was bartering chickens. And while we might think this was a no-brainer, the idea was audacious for the time. It took some convincing for people to accept that a slip of paper had the same value as those hefty coins. The government backed these bills with promises of convertibility, which, to the skeptics of the era, might have sounded as dubious as a modern cryptocurrency pitch. But with a solid state behind it, the concept took off, laying the groundwork for a financial system that could support a booming economy. This economic expansion wasn't just about lighter wallets. It was a full-blown market revolution. The Song dynasty, with its bustling trade networks, saw cities like Hangzhou and Kaifeng become cosmopolitan hubs where traders, scholars, and artisans mingled like extras in a historical epic. Markets were no longer just places to haggle over the price of fish, but vital arteries pumping life into the socio-economic body of the empire. Speaking of bustling trade, Let's not forget the Silk Road, the ancient highway of commerce that connected China to the far reaches of the known world. The Song dynasty didn't just rely on this overland route. They spiced things up with sea trade, turning coastal cities into thriving ports. This maritime expansion meant that goods flowed in like water from the Indian Ocean, Southeast Asia, and beyond. Spices, textiles, and exotic goods added flavor to the Song economy, making it a rich tapestry of international commerce. But wait, there's more. As trade flourished, so did technological innovation. The Song dynasty was like the Silicon Valley of its time, churning out inventions faster than you could say, IPO. One of the standout innovations was the movable type printing press, a contraption that made sharing information faster than a teenager zipping through social media. Invented by Bai Sheng in the 11th century, this technology was a quantum leap from woodblock printing, allowing for texts to be reproduced quickly and efficiently. Now, let's pause to appreciate the impact of this little gem. The printing press democratized knowledge, something that had previously been as elusive as a unicorn. Books became more accessible, literacy rates began to climb, and ideas could spread like wildfire. It was like the Internet 1.0 minus the cat memes. This intellectual awakening meant that the Song people could engage in more than just the daily grind. They could philosophize about life, art, and the universe, elevating society from survivalist to cerebral. Economically, these shifts allowed the Song dynasty to blossom into a culture that was as rich in thought as it was in goods. The flourishing market economy meant that people had the means and leisure to support the arts and sciences. The Song period was a golden age of painting, poetry, and innovation. Philosophers like Zhu Zai were redefining Confucian thought, and poets like Su Shi were crafting verses that still resonate today. Of course, we can't ignore the harsh realities that came with this prosperity. The wealth gap was as real then as it is today, with an elite class enjoying the fruits of trade while peasants toiled in the fields. The romantic notion of a golden age often glosses over the sweat and toil of the majority, who worked long hours for little reward. And let's not pretend that paper money solved all problems. Inflation became a pesky companion to economic growth, as the Song government occasionally printed more currency than the economy could handle. Sound familiar? Despite these challenges, the Song dynasty managed to maintain a relatively stable society through shrewd governance and a commitment to innovation. It was a time when the empire wasn't just content to sit on its laurels. It was constantly pushing boundaries, both geographical and intellectual. This era of economic boom laid the foundations for the cultural and technological advancements that would define China's legacy for generations. So, as the Song dynasty continued its dance through history, it was clear that this wasn't just about silk and swords anymore. It was about an empire that dared to think big, innovate boldly, and trade widely. And while we're on the subject of wide-reaching influence, stay tuned for how this vibrant period set the stage for even more remarkable developments in the chapters to follow. And speaking of wide-reaching influence, let's dive into the explosive realm of Song dynasty technology. First up, gunpowder. Now, before you start picturing the 4th of July, remember that these ancient chemists were not just looking to paint the night sky in technicolor. No, they had bigger, bolder, and frankly scarier ideas like warfare. Gunpowder, or black powder, as it was affectionately known, was a concoction of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, mixed by alchemists who were essentially the medieval equivalent of a mad scientist. Legend has it that gunpowder's discovery was a happy accident by Taoist alchemists in the quest for immortality. While they didn't find the elixir of life, they did stumble upon a formula that would change the fate of warfare forever. The Song dynasty, never one to pass up a good opportunity, quickly realized that gunpowder was less about eternal life and more about turning the battlefield into a barbecue. By the 11th century, the Song military was already using gunpowder-based weapons like fire arrows and bombs, transforming warfare from a game of swords and strategy to one of smoke and shrapnel. But the gunpowder revolution wasn't just about causing a ruckus. It marked a pivotal shift in military tactics and technology, setting the stage for future empires to wage war with increasingly destructive force. It was like handing a toddler a smartphone. Suddenly, everything changed. Yet, as with any new tech, the Song dynasty had to deal with the classic conundrum: how to harness the power without blowing themselves to bits. The careful balance of innovation and caution was key, and it was this savvy approach that allowed the Song to keep their military edge, at least for a while. Now, let's switch gears from explosions to something a bit more zen: agriculture. Specifically, the fast-ripening champa rice, which was like the agricultural equivalent of discovering a superfood. Imported from Vietnam in the 10th century, champa rice could be harvested twice a year, doubling productivity and making famine as rare as a selfie without a filter. This was a game-changer for the Song economy, as food surpluses led to population growth, urbanization, and ultimately more people to marvel at their technological wonders. The champa rice saga was a lesson in adaptation and efficiency. With less time needed in the fields, peasants could devote their energy to other pursuits, like crafting, trade, or possibly just enjoying a well-deserved break. It was an agricultural revolution that fed not just bellies, but also the economic engine of the empire, allowing the Song to sustain a population that soared to over 100 million by the 12th century. The Song had effectively turned rice into a tool of statecraft, proving that sometimes the key to a strong empire lies in the fields rather than the throne room. But hold on to your hats, because the Song dynasty wasn't just about blowing things up and growing rice. Their innovations set sail on the high seas, too. Enter the compass, that magical little device that kept sailors from getting lost somewhere between here and oblivion. Originally invented during the Han Dynasty, it was the Song who really took it for a spin, transforming it from a fortune-teller's toy into a navigational marvel. By the 11th century, Chinese sailors were using compasses for maritime navigation, which, when you think about it, is a pretty good way to avoid ending up as a shipwreck. The compass was a literal game-changer for trade and exploration. It allowed Song merchants to navigate the treacherous waters of the South China Sea with a level of precision that would make a GPS blush. This meant trade routes could expand, bringing back spices, silks, and all manner of exotic goods that fueled the Song economy and cultural exchange. In a way, the compass was not just a tool for finding one's way, it was a catalyst for connecting worlds. Of course, with all these advancements, the Song dynasty was not without its challenges. The innovations of the time, while groundbreaking, were part of a broader tapestry of social change that was both exciting and unsettling. The technological leaps were akin to a roller coaster ride, thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. The empire's rapid urbanization, driven by agricultural and commercial success, led to bustling cities that were as much a hub of cultural exchange as they were a petri dish of societal tension. The wealth generated by trade and innovation was not evenly distributed, and the social stratification was as stark as a black and white photo. While the elite enjoyed the spoils of prosperity, the lower classes often bore the brunt of the labor that fueled the economy. It's a tale as old as time. Progress is not always synonymous with equality. The Song dynasty's remarkable achievements were painted on a canvas of inequality, a reminder that the price of progress can sometimes be paid in human toil. Yet, despite these complexities, the Song dynasty managed to maintain a relatively stable and prosperous society. Their commitment to innovation and adaptation was their secret weapon, and it was this relentless pursuit of progress that allowed them to navigate the turbulent waters of history. The Song were not content to rest on their laurels. They were constantly pushing the envelope, whether it was in the fields of rice or on the decks of a ship. So, as we wrap up this chapter in the Song dynasty saga, it's clear that this was an era defined by bold thinking and daring innovation. From gunpowder to champa rice, from compasses to bustling trade routes, the Song dynasty was a beacon of progress in a world that was often content to let history pass it by. Their story is a testament to the power of innovation, a reminder that sometimes all it takes to change the world is a little curiosity, a lot of courage, and the occasional sprinkle of gunpowder. As we gear up for the next installment, keep in mind that the Song's legacy is not just about what they achieved, but how they dared to dream bigger and bolder than those who came before. And speaking of dreaming big, let's dive into the ultimate reality show, the Song dynasty's civil service examination system. Imagine the academic Hunger Games, minus the dystopian landscape, and plus a lot more Confucian philosophy. This was not just a test. It was the social ladder, the golden ticket, the only way to turn your family's fortune from peasant to palace. Established long before the song, this system reached its zenith during their reign, revolutionizing how power was distributed in society. Forget birthright. It was all about brains and a knack for memorizing the classics. Here's how it worked. Aspiring scholars would lock themselves in rooms with nothing but brushes and stacks of paper, cramming like their lives depended on it. Which, in a way, they did. The exams were grueling, multi-day marathons, demanding knowledge of Confucian texts, so intimate you'd think these guys were on a first-name basis with the ancient sages. Picture a 3-day essay-writing extravaganza, with the pressure of knowing that only a minuscule percentage, sometimes as low as 1%, would pass and earn a coveted government position. The stakes were high, but so were the rewards. Passing the exams meant instant elevation to the ruling class, a ticket to a life of influence, and hopefully silk robes rather than rice paddies. The civil service exams were like the Ivy League of ancient China, setting the standard for meritocracy long before the concept got its modern branding. But let's not romanticize too much. The system had its flaws. It was a game rigged against the poor, who couldn't afford the years of education necessary to even sit for the exams. So, while it did democratize power to an extent, the playing field was far from level. Now, let's take a detour into the lives of women during the Song Dynasty, a journey that's as mixed as a bag of fortune cookies. While women in Song China were not exactly breaking glass ceilings, they were more than mere footnotes in history. The era saw a curious blend of progress and regression. On the one hand, women found new economic roles, particularly in urban areas where they could engage in trade and manage businesses. In fact, some women became notable landowners and merchants, particularly in the textile and silk industries. Yet, this was also the time when the practice of foot binding emerged, a painful tradition that literally put women in a bind, both physically and socially. It was seen as a mark of beauty and status, but let's be real, it was more of a social shackle than a fashion statement. The practice spread like wildfire among the elite, and before long was a rite of passage for young girls. While the image of dainty, bound feet was romanticized in poetry and art, the reality was a lifelong struggle for those subjected to it. Speaking of art, the Song Dynasty was like the Renaissance before the Renaissance. It was an era that churned out cultural achievements faster than you can say Mona Lisa. Song poetry, for instance, was a veritable Instagram feed of the era, short, evocative, and designed to capture a moment. Poets like Su Shi and Lai Qingzhao penned verses that captured the essence of the human experience, from the beauty of a solitary moonlit night to the agony of separation from loved ones. Their work was as much about personal reflection as it was about capturing the zeitgeist of the time. And let's not forget the paintings. If you had a brush and some ink during the Song Dynasty, you were in business. Song artists perfected the landscape painting, creating serene, almost meditative vistas that still hang in prestigious galleries today. These weren't just pretty pictures. They were visual philosophies, embodying the Taoist harmony between humans and nature. And while the mountains and rivers were the stars, people were often depicted as mere specks, highlighting the grandeur of the natural world and perhaps subtly suggesting that individuals, no matter how grand their ambitions, were just part of a larger cosmic tapestry. The song artisans didn't stop at poetry and painting. Enter porcelain, the ceramic equivalent of haute couture. Song porcelain was so finely crafted it could make a modern-day collector weep. The secret, a blend of kaolin clay and petancy rock, fired at kilns harder than a July afternoon. The result was a translucent, almost ethereal ceramic that became a hot commodity not just within China, but across the world. If you had a piece of Song porcelain, you were practically the envy of every trade route. But let's not get lost in the allure of delicate vases and misty mountains. Despite these cultural high notes, the era wasn't all sunshine and cherry blossoms. The Song Dynasty, in its quest for cultural and technological supremacy, often overlooked the brewing social tensions underneath. The wealth gap was wider than the Great Wall, and for many, the Golden Age was more of a gilded cage. The peasants, the backbone of the empire, bore the brunt of taxes and labor demands, their lives a stark contrast to the opulence enjoyed by the elite. Yet, the Song Dynasty endures in history as a period of remarkable achievements. Their legacy is a testament to the power of intellectual and cultural pursuits, even in the face of societal inequities. They dared to innovate, to break boundaries, and in doing so, they left an indelible mark on both China and the world. As we near the end of this saga, remember that the story of the song is far from finished. With each chapter, there's more to uncover about how this dynasty navigated the turbulent waters of history with a compass of curiosity and a sail made of silk dreams. Keep the curiosity burning. The song journey is just getting started. So, as we sail into the final act of the Song dynasty, let's be clear. This isn't your typical fairy tale ending. No riding off into the sunset here, more like being chased into it by a horde of Mongols. See, the Song dynasty, for all its innovations and cultural flourishes, was like that hot air balloon soaring majestically until somebody forgot to pack enough fuel. And let me tell you, the Mongols, led by Kublai Khan, were more than happy to provide a crash landing. Around the 13th century, the Song dynasty found itself caught in a perfect storm of internal strife and external threats. Internally, the bureaucracy that had been the envy of medieval administrators was starting to resemble a government version of Jenga. Years of peace and prosperity had lulled the ruling class into complacency, making them as vulnerable as a smartphone with no password. Corruption seeped into the system like a viral cat video, everywhere and impossible to ignore. Officials, once paragons of Confucian virtue, were getting caught with their hands in the imperial cookie jar, undermining the very foundation of governance. On the external front, the Mongols were doing what Mongols do best, expanding their empire with the enthusiasm of a kid opening presents on Christmas morning. Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, was not just any conqueror, he was a force of nature. By the 1270, he had set his sights on the Song dynasty, seeing it as both a delectable morsel and a stepping stone to greater conquests. The Song's southern territories were like an all-you-can-eat buffet, and Kublai Khan had brought his appetite. The Song military, once a formidable force, was now more of a paper tiger. Years of peace had left the army rusty, their swords metaphorically dulled by bureaucracy and budget cuts. The once cunning strategies that Zhao Quanjian had used to establish the dynasty were as outdated as dial-up internet in the face of Mongol horsemen. The Song's defensive innovations, like their city walls, were akin to putting a band-aid on a bullet wound when facing Kublai's sophisticated siege tactics. Speaking of those Mongol tactics, Kublai Khan didn't just storm the gates. He laid a siege that would make even the most patient of medieval generals weep. The final blow came in 1279 at the Battle of Yemen, where the Song navy was decimated. It was a naval showdown reminiscent of a Hollywood blockbuster, but with a tragic twist. The Song's last emperor, a child named Zhao Bing, was forced to leap into the sea by his loyal minister, choosing death over capture. Talk about a dramatic exit stage left. With the Mongols' victory, the Yuan dynasty was born, and Kublai Khan established a new order. But the Song's legacy was far from erased. It lingered like a cultural aftertaste, influencing the Yuan in ways the conquerors hadn't anticipated. The Song had been a masterclass in innovation, and while the Mongols might have won the war, they couldn't erase the centuries of progress the Song had etched into history. Now, let's talk legacy, because the Song dynasty is like that cult classic movie that never won an Oscar, but inspired a generation of filmmakers. For starters, their economic policies, including the use of paper money, laid the groundwork for modern fiscal systems. The Song's commercial prowess turned cities into economic powerhouses, a legacy that outlasted the dynasty itself. Even as the Yuan dynasty took over, they couldn't resist borrowing a page from the Song's playbook, incorporating administrative and economic strategies that had fueled the previous empire's success. In terms of culture, the Song dynasty was a renaissance of its own making. Their contributions to art, literature, and technology were the stuff of legend, setting a standard that inspired future dynasties. The movable type printing press, a game-changer in the dissemination of knowledge, was as transformative as the advent of the Internet. It democratized information, allowing ideas to spread like wildfire and fostering an intellectual environment that would continue to thrive long after the last Song emperor had left the stage. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Song era also highlighted the darker side of progress. The wealth gap, was a chasm that no amount of Confucian philosophy could bridge, and the peasants, much like extras in a grand historical drama, often found themselves bearing the brunt of this so-called golden age. The civil service exams, while meritocratic in theory, were more a testament to one's economic background than intellectual prowess. The Song Dynasty, in its pursuit of greatness, painted a picture of progress that was as flawed as it was beautiful. In the end, the Song Dynasty serves as a powerful reminder of the dual nature of human achievement. It was an era that dared to dream big, to push the boundaries of what was possible, and in doing so, left an indelible mark on history. Yet, it also underscored the limits of innovation when not paired with equitable governance. Like a great novel with an unexpected twist, the Song Dynasty's story is one of triumph and tragedy, a saga of innovation overshadowed by the inevitability of decline. So, as we close the book on the Song Dynasty, let's not forget that history, much like life, is rarely a straightforward narrative. The Song's tale is a tapestry woven with threads of brilliance and strands of folly, a testament to the complexity of human endeavor. And while the dynasty may have fallen, its spirit of innovation, its quest for knowledge, and its cultural riches continue to resonate through the annals of history, reminding us that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit can achieve the extraordinary. A young boy named Simón Bolivar was born in 1783 in Caracas, Venezuela, with a silver spoon practically glued to his hand. No exaggeration here. His family was rolling in the kind of dough that would make a modern tech billionaire blush. The Bolivars were one of the richest families in the region, owning sugar plantations, vast estates, and a mountain of slaves. Not exactly the kind of wealth you acquire through thrift and good budgeting. Simon's childhood was a curious mix of privilege and early loss. His father died when he was just 3, a fact that might have left him feeling a bit like an aristocratic Batman, minus the cape and crime-fighting gadgets. His mother passed away 6 years later, leaving young Simón to be raised by tutors and an uncle who probably wasn't winning any Guardian of the Year awards. Talk about a rough start, right? But that's not all. This early taste of mortality might have been the first spark in his eventual revolutionary fire. Despite these personal setbacks, Bolivar's life was anything but ordinary. His education was top-notch, thanks to the family fortune. He was sent to Europe for his studies, a rite of passage for the elite at the time, somewhat akin to today's Ivy League ambitions. In Spain, Bolivar rubbed shoulders with aristocrats and intellectuals, soaking up ideas like a sponge. But it wasn't just the European high society that influenced him. Oh no, it was the Enlightenment thinkers who really got his revolutionary juices flowing. We're talking Voltaire, Rousseau, Locke, those guys. They basically told the world, hey, maybe monarchies aren't the best idea ever, and Bolivar listened. Let's pause and consider this. A young Venezuelan aristocrat sitting in a Madrid salon, pondering the audacity of democracy while sipping on some fine Spanish wine. Not a bad gig, right? But Bolivar wasn't just about pondering. He soon realized that the Enlightenment was more than just a philosophy. It was a call to action. And action is what Bolivar was all about, even if he didn't know it yet. Now, Bolivar's personal life deserves a mention here. Amidst all the intellectual enlightenment and social hobnobbing, he found time to fall head over heels in love. Enter Maria Teresa Rodriguez del Toro y Alesa, a young Spanish aristocrat who captured his heart. Bolivar married her in 1802, but the romantic bliss was tragically short-lived. Maria Teresa died of yellow fever less than a year later. Heartbreaking, absolutely. But here's where the myth meets the man. It's said this devastating loss hardened Bolivar's resolve, transforming him from a grieving widower into a fiery revolutionary. Real life is rarely that straightforward, but the legend sure sounds compelling. In the aftermath of Maria Teresa's death, Bolivar threw himself into the political upheavals of the time. By now, he was itching to return to Venezuela, a land simmering with discontent against Spanish rule. He wasn't just a man on a mission, he was a man with a vision. Bolivar saw a liberated South America, free from the shackles of colonial rule. But before he could embark on his liberating escapades, he had to navigate the treacherous waters of early 19th century geopolitics. No small feat. Bolivar's return to Venezuela in 1807 marked the beginning of his transformation from wealthy dilettante to hardened revolutionary. But don't be fooled into thinking this was an overnight change. It was more like a slow-cooked stew of political ambition, personal resolve, and burning idealism. He wasn't just fighting for independence. He was fighting for a new order, one that reflected the Enlightenment ideals he'd come to cherish. Now, let's not get too carried away romanticizing Bolivar's early life. Sure, he was a revolutionary hero in the making, but he was also a man of his time, flawed, privileged, and sometimes myopic. His upbringing and education set him on a path not available to most, a path paved with gold and opportunity. Yet, it was his personal losses and the influence of revolutionary ideas that truly shaped his destiny. So there you have it, the early years of Simón Bolívar, a mix of aristocratic privilege, personal tragedy, and intellectual awakening. It's a story that sets the stage for the epic saga to come. Our young Bolivar was about to step onto the world stage, armed with ideas that would ignite a continent. But that's a tale for another day. For now, let's just appreciate the irony of a wealthy Venezuelan aristocrat inspired by the lofty ideals of equality and liberty. History sure knows how to craft an intriguing character, doesn't it? Now, with all that aristocratic privilege and Enlightenment inspiration, Simón Bolívar was ready to step into the tumultuous world of revolutionary warfare. But let's not kid ourselves. The path to liberation wasn't a straight line. It was more like a roller coaster designed by someone with a particularly twisted sense of humor. You see, Bolivar's early military endeavors were a chaotic mix of near misses, strategic retreats, and a few victories that felt more like flukes than feats of genius. By 1810, Venezuela was a powder keg of revolutionary fervor. The Spanish crown was in disarray, courtesy of Napoleon's European antics, and Latin America was catching the independence fever. Enter Bolivar, the man with a plan, or at least a vague idea of a plan. He joined the revolutionary junta in Caracas, which declared independence from Spain in 1811. And just like that, Bolivar found himself in the thick of things, thrust into a leadership role that even he probably didn't fully comprehend. But dreams of liberty don't come cheap, my friends. The fledgling republic was beset by internal divisions and external threats. The Spanish loyalists, or royalists, weren't exactly thrilled about the whole independence idea. They wanted to keep things decidedly old school, and they had the military muscle to back it up. The first Venezuelan republic was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. In this chaotic environment, Bolivar's military career took off, if you could call it that. He commanded a ragtag group of men who were more enthusiastic than experienced. Imagine a band of misfits armed with mismatched rifles, rusty swords, and a lot of heart. They were like the bad news bears of revolutionaries. Bolivar's charisma was the glue holding this unruly bunch together. He had a knack for rallying the troops with stirring speeches, a skill that would serve him well in the years to come. However, early battles were a sobering reality check. The royalists weren't just going to pack up and leave because a few idealistic rebels told them to. Bolivar tasted defeat more than once, forced to retreat and regroup. His strategic retreats became a hallmark of his early campaigns, a necessary evil in the face of overwhelming odds. But here's the thing. Each setback only fueled his resolve. Bolivar wasn't just fighting for a political cause. He was fighting for a vision of a united South America free from colonial shackles. Amidst the turmoil, Bolivar embarked on what would become known as the Admirable Campaign in 1813. This was his moment to shine, or at least to attempt a daring comeback. Starting in New Granada, modern-day Colombia, Bolivar led a force of about 650 men on a grueling march toward Caracas. And let me tell you, this wasn't some leisurely stroll through the countryside. We're talking about traversing treacherous terrain, battling tropical diseases, and facing an enemy that would love nothing more than to see Bolivar fail spectacularly. But here's where Bolivar's charisma really worked its magic. He managed to inspire loyalty and courage in his troops, despite the odds stacked against them. His speeches were legendary, filled with fiery rhetoric and promises of glory. He knew how to tug at the heartstrings and ignite the revolutionary spirit. And let's be honest, when you're knee-deep in mud, fighting for a cause that seems all but lost, a little charisma goes a long way. The admirable campaign was a series of swift, decisive victories that boosted Bolivar's reputation as a military leader. By August 1813, he triumphantly entered Caracas, where he was hailed as the Liberator. Quite the title, right? Bolivar had essentially pulled off a miracle, turning a ragtag army into a force capable of challenging Spanish authority. But before we get too carried away with the heroics, it's crucial to remember that this was just one chapter in a very long and complicated story. Sure, Bolivar was celebrated as a liberator, but the reality was far more complex. The newly established Second Republic of Venezuela was a fragile entity, plagued by internal dissent and constant threats from royalist forces. Bolivar's dream of a stable, unified nation was about as elusive as a unicorn at this point. And let's not forget the economic context. War doesn't just strain human resources, it drains financial ones too. The economy was in tatters, and Bolivar's government struggled to maintain order and support. Despite the challenges, Bolivar's commitment to the cause never wavered. He was a relentless visionary, a man who saw beyond the immediate chaos to the potential of a liberated continent. But let's be real, he was also a man driven by ambition and a desire for personal glory. The line between selflessness and self-interest was often blurred, as it tends to be in the stories of great leaders. As Bolivar's campaigns continued, his legend grew. He was a symbol of hope and defiance, a beacon for those who believed in the possibility of a new world. But with every victory came new challenges, and Bolivar's journey was far from over. He would face betrayal, heartbreak, and yet more military setbacks. But that's a tale for another day. For now, let's just appreciate the irony of a man born into privilege, fighting to dismantle the very system that afforded him his status. History, with all its twists and turns, never fails to remind us that the path to greatness is rarely straightforward. Speaking of Bolivar's winding road to greatness, let's dive into one of the most audacious episodes of his career, the infamous crossing of the Andes. No, this wasn't your average weekend hike. We're talking about a strategic maneuver so bold it makes Hannibal crossing the Alps look like a Sunday stroll. In 1819, Bolivar and his ragtag army faced the daunting task of traversing the Andes to surprise the Spanish royalists in New Granada. This wasn't just any mountain range. It was the Andes, with altitudes reaching up to 13,000 feet. That's like trying to play a game of chess while running a marathon at an oxygen-deficient altitude. Now, let's set the stage. Picture Bolivar, a man with a vision as grand as the mountains themselves, standing at the foot of this formidable obstacle. His goal, to catch the royalists with their pants down in New Granada, a region that at this point was like the crown jewel in the Spanish Empire's increasingly tarnished crown. But first, Bolivar had to get his troops over the Andes. No big deal, right? Just a few days of trekking through some of the most treacherous terrains known to man. Easy peasy. But wait. This isn't just about geographical challenges. The logistics alone would make any modern military planner break into a cold sweat. We're talking about moving an army of roughly 500 men, plus horses, supplies, and artillery, over a mountain range that seemed to have been designed by Mother Nature on a particularly bad day. Supplies were scarce, and the troops had to deal with freezing temperatures, thin air, and the ever-present threat of illness. Imagine trying to march in those conditions with nothing but threadbare uniforms and shoes that would fall apart faster than a cheap pair of flip-flops. Despite these challenges, Bolivar's charisma and determination kept the men moving. He was like a revolutionary Pied Piper, leading his troops through conditions that would make even the most seasoned explorer think twice. And here's the kicker. They managed to cross the Andes in just over 2 weeks. That's right, 2 weeks to conquer a natural barrier that had defeated many before them. It was a feat of endurance and determination that quickly became the stuff of legend. Now let's get into the gritty details. The crossing began in late June 1819. Bolivar's army set off from the Venezuelan plains, where the oppressive heat was soon replaced by the biting cold of the mountains. At one point, temperatures plummeted to below freezing, and snowstorms battered the troops, turning the march into a nightmarish ordeal. Men and horses fell victim to frostbite and altitude sickness. And then there was the food, or lack thereof. Rations were so scarce that soldiers had to survive on a meager diet that would barely sustain a small child, let alone a grown man marching through the Andes. But why, you might ask, would Bolivar choose such a seemingly impassable route? The answer lies in the element of surprise. The Spanish royalists were like a well-fed cat lounging in front of a lit fireplace, completely unaware of the storm brewing outside. They never expected Bolivar to attempt such a daring crossing, let alone succeed. And that's precisely why Bolivar's plan worked. He turned the impossible into the possible, catching the royalists off guard and gaining a crucial strategic advantage. Bolivar's gamble paid off, and by early August, his army emerged from the mountains, battered but victorious in spirit. But don't be fooled into thinking that the hard part was over. The real test was yet to come. The Battle of Boyacá, the pivotal showdown that would ultimately tip the scales in Bolivar's favor. On August 7, 1819, Bolivar's forces met the Royalists near the Boyacá River. The Royalists, led by General José María Barrero, were completely unprepared for the battle-hardened force that had just emerged from the Andes. Bolivar's troops, invigorated by their miraculous crossing, fought with the kind of resolve that only comes from having stared death in the face and lived to tell the tale. The battle itself was swift and decisive, lasting just 2 hours. Bolivar's forces, numbering around 850, outmaneuvered and outflanked the Royalists, who were caught off guard and out of position. It was a classic case of brains over brawn, with Bolivar's tactical genius shining through. The Royalists, numbering about 670, were routed, and General Barrero was captured, effectively ending Spanish rule in New Granada. In terms of casualties, the Royalists suffered around 100 killed and 150 wounded, while Bolivar's forces lost just 13 men. Talk about a lopsided victory. So there you have it, the turning point in Bolivar's revolutionary saga. The Battle of Boyacá wasn't just a military victory. It was a symbol of what grit, determination, and a little bit of madness could achieve. Bolivar's crossing of the Andes and subsequent victory at Boyacá shattered the illusion of Spanish invincibility, inspiring a wave of revolutionary fervor across South America. But before we put Bolivar on a pedestal, let's remember the harsh realities he faced. His triumph was built on the backs of men who endured unimaginable hardships, driven by a leader whose vision was as relentless as it was revolutionary. And what of the myth versus the reality? Bolivar's crossing of the Andes is often romanticized as a heroic march, without acknowledging the sheer desperation and human cost involved. It wasn't just Bolivar's willpower that won the day. It was the collective endurance of his men, who followed a leader they believed in, even when the odds were stacked against them. In the end, Bolivar's audacious campaign reshaped the political landscape of South America, but it was a victory paid for in sweat, blood, and the indomitable human spirit. As Bolivar basked in the glow of his victory at Boyacá, the road ahead remained fraught with challenges. The battle was won, but the war for a united and independent South America was far from over. Bolivar's dream of a liberated continent still hung in the balance, and the path to achieving it would require more than just military prowess. It would demand political acumen, alliances, and the ability to navigate the turbulent waters of a continent in flux. But those are stories for another day. For now, let's just appreciate the irony of Bolivar's journey, a tale of privilege turned revolutionary, of a man who dared to dream big and against all odds, made those dreams a reality. And so, as Bolivar basked in the glow of his victory at Boyacá, he might have felt like a rock star after a sold-out concert. But instead of groupies and encores, he had the monumental task of turning his military victories into a lasting political reality. His vision, a united South America, or as he grandly dubbed it, Gran Colombia, a superstate that would give the European empires a run for their money. Imagine a South American version of the United States, but with more llamas and fewer fast food chains. But hold your horses, because reality was about to throw a wet blanket over Bolivar's dream. Establishing Gran Colombia was like trying to herd cats, if those cats were also armed and had their own political agendas. Comprised of what we now know as Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama, this ambitious project was Bolivar's attempt to create a strong, centralized government that could unify the newly liberated territories. Sounds simple on paper, right? But in practice, It was about as stable as a Jenga tower in the middle of an earthquake. You see, Bolivar's vision was built on some pretty shaky foundations. First, there was the issue of geography. We're talking about a vast region with jungles, mountains, and rivers that made communication and governance about as easy as conducting a symphony with a kazoo. Then there were the cultural differences. Each region had its own identity, traditions, and leaders who weren't exactly eager to give up their newfound power. It's like trying to get a bunch of chefs to agree on the best way to make a soufflé. Everyone has an opinion, and no one wants to compromise. The political landscape was equally treacherous. Bolivar's dream of a centralized government clashed with the desires of local leaders who wanted more autonomy. These guys weren't interested in taking orders from a distant capital. They wanted to call the shots in their own backyards. Enter Francisco de Paula Santander, Bolivar's right-hand man and the vice president of Gran Colombia. Santander was a pragmatist, a man who believed in federalism and decentralization, a direct contrast to Bolivar's top-down approach. It was a classic case of idealism meeting practicality, and the two men were constantly at odds. Now, let's talk numbers. Gran Colombia at its height covered over 1.3 million square kilometers, roughly the size of modern-day Peru and Bolivia combined. Managing such an expanse required not just visionary leadership, but also cold, hard cash, and therein lay another problem. The young nation was broke. Years of warfare had drained the coffers, leaving Bolivar with more IOUs than actual currency. The economy was in shambles, trade routes were in disarray, inflation was running rampant. It's hard to build a dream on a shoestring budget, no matter how charismatic the leader. But Bolivar was nothing if not persistent. He pushed forward with constitutional reforms designed to strengthen the central government and curb regional power bases. The 1821 Constitution of Cúcuta was his crowning achievement, or so he hoped. It established a strong executive branch with Bolivar as president, a move that was meant to bring order, but instead fueled resentment among regional leaders. They saw Bolivar's centralized approach as a threat to their autonomy, and they weren't shy about voicing their discontent. Speaking of discontent, let's not forget about the socio-economic divisions that plagued Gran Colombia. Despite the lofty ideals of equality and liberty, the reality was that society remained deeply hierarchical. The Creole elite, who had led the fight for independence, were reluctant to share power with the mestizos, indigenous peoples, and freed slaves. Bolivar, who had once dreamed of a racially integrated society, found himself grappling with the very prejudices he had hoped to dismantle. It's a bitter pill to swallow when your allies are stuck in the past while you're busy trying to build the future. Now, here's where things get juicy. Bolivar, the man who had once commanded armies and inspired nations, found himself embroiled in political infighting that would make a soap opera look tame. His relationship with Santander grew increasingly strained, with both men accusing each other of undermining the Republic. The power struggle between Bolivar's centralists and Santander's federalists threatened to tear Gran Colombia apart. It's like watching a band break up over creative differences, except instead of world tours and platinum records, they were fighting over constitutions and regional autonomy. As if political squabbles weren't enough, Bolivar had to contend with the never-ending threat of personal betrayal. His inner circle was a hotbed of intrigue, with plots and conspiracies lurking around every corner. In 1828, Bolivar narrowly escaped an assassination attempt in Bogotá, orchestrated by disgruntled political rivals. The plot was foiled, but the message was clear. Bolivar's grip on power was slipping, and his enemies were closing in. The assassination attempt was a turning point for Bolivar, a stark reminder that his dream of unity was crumbling under the weight of internal discord. Disillusionment set in, as personal betrayals and political failures overshadowed his revolutionary achievements. Bolivar, once the Liberator, now found himself a leader without a cause, clinging to a vision that seemed increasingly out of reach. But let's not paint Bolivar as a tragic hero just yet. His vision, flawed as it was, had set in motion a wave of change that would reverberate across the continent. Gran Colombia may have been a political failure, but it was a testament to Bolivar's audacity and ambition. It was a bold experiment in nation-building, a precursor to the modern states that would eventually emerge from its ashes. In the end, Bolivar's struggle for unity was a reflection of the larger struggle for identity and self-determination in post-colonial Latin America. It was a reminder that revolutions, for all their promise, are messy and unpredictable affairs, shaped by the very human flaws of those who lead them. Bolivar's dream may have faltered, but his legacy as the Liberator endured, a testament to the enduring power of a single man's vision in a world of chaos and conflict. With Gran Colombia unraveling and his health failing, Bolivar's final years were marked by a sense of resignation. He withdrew from public life, spending his last days in exile in Santa Marta, Colombia. It was there, in December 1830, that he died at the age of 47, a man who had once reshaped a continent but now lay forgotten by the very people he had sought to unite. And so, the tale of Bolivar and Gran Colombia comes to a close, a story of ambition and failure, of dreams realized and dreams deferred. While Bolivar's vision of a unified South America may have crumbled, his legacy as a revolutionary icon endures. His life was a testament to the power of ideals, even when those ideals are outpaced by the harsh realities of politics and human nature. As we continue this journey through history, let's remember that Bolivar's story is not just one of triumph and tragedy, but a reflection of the complex dance between vision and reality, hope and disillusionment, a story that resonates across the ages, reminding us of the timeless struggle for freedom and unity in an ever-changing world. Bolivar's story, much like a Shakespearean drama, culminates in a bittersweet denouement, filled with grandeur and ruin, hope and despair. As Gran Colombia disintegrated, Bolivar found himself marooned on the shores of solitude, a revolutionary without a revolution. By 1830, he was a spectral figure, wandering the echoes of his once thundering ideals. His health, much like his political dreams, was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater in a catfight. Tuberculosis, that relentless thief of breath, had set its sights on him, reducing the Liberator to a shadow of his former self. Exiled to Santa Marta, Bolivar spent his final days grappling with a legacy as complex as the man himself. Here was a leader who had reshaped a continent, yet found himself disowned by the very nations he had fought to free. Talk about a thankless job. Bolivar had once imagined himself as the George Washington of South America, but unlike the father of the United States, his farewell tour was less of a triumphant exit and more of a quiet retreat into oblivion. On December 17, 1830, at the age of 47, he succumbed to the disease, leaving behind a continent in turmoil and a reputation as tangled as the jungles he once traversed. Now, let's flip through the pages of Bolivar's legacy. It's a tale as tangled as a soap opera plot, filled with mythic heroism and gritty reality. Bolivar's dream of a united South America was both his crowning glory and his ultimate downfall. The irony: in trying to forge unity, he inadvertently sowed seeds of division. As he championed the cause of liberation, regional leaders were busy plotting their own power plays, each with a vision as grandiose as Bolivar's, but lacking the cohesive glue of his revolutionary zeal. Despite the fractured state of Gran Colombia, Bolivar's impact on South America was monumental. He liberated not just one, but 6 nations: Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and Panama. That's right, 6 countries owe their independence to this one man who dared to dream big. His military campaigns, though often chaotic, were nothing short of legendary. Bolivar's strategic brilliance was matched only by his charisma, a potent mix that ignited the revolutionary spirit across a continent tired of colonial chains. But let's not gloss over the gritty details. Bolivar, for all his visionary brilliance, was a man of contradictions. He was both a liberator and a dictator, a champion of freedom who sometimes wielded power with an iron fist. His attempts to centralize power in Gran Colombia were seen by many as autocratic, and his political maneuvering often left him at odds with former allies. It's the age-old tale of power corrupting, or perhaps of ideals clashing with the messy reality of governance. Economically, Bolivar's dream faced the cold, harsh winds of reality. The newly independent states were mired in debt, their economies ravaged by years of warfare. Inflation soared like a hot air balloon with a broken tether, while trade networks resembled a jigsaw puzzle missing half its pieces. Bolivar's vision of a prosperous, united South America was up against the very real challenge of rebuilding nations from the ground up, without the financial backing of their former colonial overlords. Politically, the landscape was as volatile as a soap opera love triangle. The fragmentation of Gran Colombia was a testament to the deep-seated regionalism and political rivalries that Bolivar could never fully reconcile. His vision of a centralized, unified government clashed with the burgeoning desire for local autonomy, a clash that would echo throughout Latin American history. The dream of unity was like a mirage, always shimmering on the horizon but never within reach. Yet, Bolivar's legacy isn't just a cautionary tale of hubris and ambition. It's a story of resilience and the power of ideas. His vision of a liberated continent inspired generations of leaders and revolutionaries. His name became synonymous with freedom, etched in the annals of history alongside the likes of Washington and Napoleon. Streets, cities, and even a country, Bolivia, bear his name, a testament to the indelible mark he left on the world. In the end, Bolivar's life is a reminder of the complex dance between myth and reality. The man who liberated nations was also a man haunted by his own limitations and the fickle nature of political alliances. He was a visionary who dared to dream of a united South America, yet his legacy is a tapestry woven with both triumph and tragedy. It's a potent reminder that history, much like life itself, is rarely black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of colors, each hue representing a facet of human ambition, folly, and resilience. As we close this chapter on Bolivar, let's reflect on the nature of heroism. History often remembers its heroes in broad strokes, painting them as paragons of virtue or villains of their own making. But the truth is often more nuanced. Bolivar was a man who dared to defy the status quo, who envisioned a world free from colonial domination. His legacy is a testament to the power of ideals, even when those ideals are battered by the storms of reality. So, what can we learn from Bolivar's life? Perhaps it's that the pursuit of greatness is fraught with challenges, but also with the potential for profound change. Bolivar's dream of a united South America may have crumbled, but his vision of liberation ignited a flame that burns brightly to this day. His story is a reminder that while the path to freedom is never easy, it's a journey worth taking. And who knows? Maybe, just maybe, Bolivar's dream of unity will one day find its place in the sun, illuminating a continent where the echoes of his revolutionary spirit continue to resonate. And there you have it, the life and legacy of Simón Bolívar, a tale of revolution and reflection, of dreams and disillusionment. As we drift off into the embrace of sleep, let's carry with us the lessons of history and the enduring power of the human spirit to strive for something greater, even in the face of overwhelming odds. After all, isn't that what makes the story of Bolivar, and indeed all of history, so endlessly captivating? In the heart of a landscape where today's GPS might just shrug its shoulders, the ancient Maya carved out a civilization that would leave anthropologists high-fiving each other over their cornflakes. This story isn't just etched in the stones of long-abandoned cities, but is rooted in the very jungles and highlands of Central America. We're diving into a world that began taking shape around 2000 BCE, give or take a few centuries for dramatic effect. It was then that the Maya decided that the lush, albeit mosquito-ridden, terrain of what we now call southern Mexico and Central America was the place to set up shop. The Maya had a flair for picking locations that were not only scenic, but also packed a strategic punch. These folks were the original proponents of location, location, location. Picture the region: dense rainforests, vast swamps, and towering highlands. While modern-day real estate agents might have had a field day selling the views, the Maya were more interested in the practical perks. The area's abundant natural resources offered an all-you-can-eat buffet of water, animals, and other goodies essential for human survival. But let's not pretend they just stumbled upon this paradise and set up camp. The Maya were agricultural wizards, and their green thumbs were practically glowing. They invented methods like slash-and-burn agriculture, which sounds like the title of a heavy metal album, but was actually a savvy way to clear land for farming. The chard remains enriched the soil, setting the stage for crops like maize, beans, and squash, the holy trinity of Mesoamerican cuisine. By the way, Maize wasn't just a corn on the cob. It was the cornerstone of their diet, as crucial as Wi-Fi to a modern teenager. Speaking of smart strategies, the Maya were masters at harnessing water, which was as valuable as gold in those tropical climes. They created intricate systems of reservoirs and canals, ensuring that even the driest seasons wouldn't leave them high and dry. This is where today's civil engineers might start taking notes. Their water management was so effective that it supported burgeoning populations, allowing the Maya to build cities that would eventually rival even their most ambitious dreams. Fast forward to around 250 CE, and the Maya had transformed early settlements into complex urban centers. These weren't just clusters of huts topped with thatched roofs. We're talking about cities with grand plazas, towering pyramids, and palaces that would make today's luxury architects raise an envious eyebrow. Tikal, one of the most famous, boasted a population that could have reached upwards of 100,000 people at its peak. That's like cramming a modern suburb into a jungle without losing any of the allure or charm. Their knack for city planning was not just a testament to their architectural genius, but also to their social and political organization. The cities weren't isolated. They were interconnected through a network of trade routes. Jade, obsidian, and cacao were just a few of the hot commodities traded, with cacao beans even functioning as currency. Yes, chocolate was money. Imagine the implications for Halloween. While crafting this vibrant civilization, the Maya were also busy developing a culture that was as intricate as their cities. They were astronomers, mathematicians, and scribes, with a penchant for recording everything from royal lineages to epic battles. Their hieroglyphic writing system was as complex as it was beautiful, a testament to a society that valued knowledge and history. However, let's not get carried away by the romanticized vision of jungle-dwelling philosopher kings. The Maya world was also one of power struggles, with kings and queens vying for dominance like it was the original Game of Thrones. City-states occasionally clashed, and alliances were as fragile as the pottery they left behind. So, as the Maya civilization rose, it did so not in a vacuum, but as a result of a delicate balance of innovation, resource management, and a sprinkle of good old-fashioned ambition. Their story is one of triumph over the elements, a tale of a people who turned a challenging environment into a thriving civilization. The Maya didn't just survive the jungle, they thrived in it, leaving a legacy that continues to captivate and confuse historians to this very day. Now, let's delve into the economic engine that propelled the Mayan civilization to such dizzying heights. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just the allure of chocolate, though that certainly sweetened the deal. The Mayans built a trade network so vast and intricate it would make even today's global supply chains blush. Picture this, a web of trade routes stretching hundreds of miles through dense jungles, across rivers, and over mountains. These paths were the lifelines of the Mayan economy, bustling with merchants whose bartering skills were as finely tuned as a concert grand piano. The goods exchanged were a veritable treasure trove of Mesoamerican bling. Obsidian from the volcanic highlands, jade that shimmered like a tropical lagoon in the sun, and of course, cacao beans. Yes, in a delightful twist of fate, chocolate was more than just a guilty pleasure. It was cold, hard currency. Imagine paying your taxes in Hershey bars. Now that's a system I could get behind. But let's not romanticize this too much. The trade routes were no leisurely stroll through the park. Traveling them was the ancient equivalent of navigating a Black Friday sale at a megastore. Dangerous terrain, hostile wildlife, and yes, the occasional bandit made these journeys anything but a walk in the park. Yet, the Maya were no strangers to risk and reward. They knew that these goods were the lifeblood of their cities, fueling the economy like premium gasoline in a sports car. These trade networks weren't just about moving goods. They were cultural superhighways, spreading ideas, technologies, and styles like ancient TikTok trends. The exchange of goods facilitated a mingling of cultures, introducing new techniques in pottery, weaving, and even urban planning. It was a dynamic blend of, I'll take your jade for my obsidian, and by the way, have you seen this new way to build a temple? At the heart of all this economic activity were the Mayan markets, bustling hubs of commerce that would make your local farmer's market look like a lemonade stand. These were vibrant places, alive with the clamor of merchants haggling over everything from textiles to foodstuffs. You can almost hear the echoes of bargaining. 2 carbs of maize for a handful of beans. You've got to be kidding me. It was a scene as chaotic and colorful as a modern trading floor, minus the power suits. The markets weren't just about commerce. They were social melting pots where people from all walks of life rubbed shoulders. Picture the elite, decked in their finest jade jewelry, mingling with farmers who had spent the morning tending their crops. The markets were great equalizers, spaces where everyone had something to gain or trade. They were also the perfect places for a little gossip. Let's be real, humans haven't changed much in that department. Speaking of society, we can't ignore the social hierarchy that kept the Mayan world humming like a well-oiled machine. At the top of the pyramid, sometimes literally, were the nobles and priests. These folks weren't just sitting pretty. They played crucial roles in governance, religion, and the arts. If you were a king, your job wasn't just to look regal while wearing a fancy headdress. You were expected to lead your city-state in battles, negotiate alliances, and perhaps most importantly, ensure the guards were happy. No pressure, right? But let's not forget the everyday folks, the backbone of Mayan society. The farmers, craftsmen, and laborers who made sure the wheels kept turning. Without them, the elite would have been little more than fancy figureheads. The farmers, in particular, deserve a standing ovation. They worked tirelessly to cultivate crops like maize, beans, and squash, ensuring that everyone had enough to eat. And let's not gloss over their innovative techniques. Slash and burn was just the tip of the agricultural iceberg. Terracing, irrigation, and crop rotation were all part of their repertoire. They were the unsung heroes, the silent majority who made the Mayan civilization possible. The Mayans' deep understanding of their environment, coupled with their sophisticated societal structure, created a resilient civilization that could weather both literal and metaphorical storms. But this wasn't some utopian paradise. Competition and conflict were as much a part of Mayan life as corn tortillas. City-states were in a constant state of rivalry, vying for resources, territory, and prestige. Alliances were formed and broken with the frequency of Hollywood marriages, and when diplomacy failed, warfare was never far behind. So, while the Mayan world was a place of remarkable achievements and cultural richness, it was also a landscape of power plays and precarious balances. The same trade routes that brought prosperity could also bring enemies to your doorstep. The social hierarchies that ensured order could just as easily breed discontent. Yet, through all this, the Maya thrived, their civilization a testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and yes, a little bit of audacity. In this intricate dance of trade and social structure, the Maya left an indelible mark on history, one that continues to fascinate and perplex. As we continue this journey through their world, we'll uncover even more layers of this enigmatic civilization. But for now, let's pause and appreciate the delicate balance they maintained, a balancing act that was as much about survival as it was about ambition. And so, with trade routes weaving tales of commerce and culture and social hierarchies that both united and divided, the Maya wrote their story in the pages of history. But stay tuned, because this ancient epic is far from over. There's more to explore, more to question, and certainly more to be amazed by in the chapters to come. And so, with trade routes weaving tales of commerce and culture and social hierarchies that both united and divided, the Maya wrote their story in the pages of history. But stay tuned, because this ancient epic is far from over. There's more to explore, more to question, and certainly more to be amazed by in the chapters to come. Now let's swivel our focus to the Mayan political landscape, an arena so charged with drama and intrigue it makes modern politics seem like a gardening club. Imagine this. The ancient Maya realm wasn't a single united empire like Rome or Persia. Oh no, the Maya were more like a collection of ambitious siblings, each city-state striving to be the favorite child. And at the top of the food chain were the powerhouses, Tikal and Calakmul. These were the ancient equivalents of New York and Los Angeles, minus the traffic jams and overpriced lattes. They weren't just cities. They were the epicenters of power, culture, and let's be honest, a fair bit of ego. Tikal, nestled in the jungle of modern-day Guatemala, was the rock star of the classic period, around 200 to 900 CE. At its peak, Tikal boasted a population that rivaled that of a small modern city, and it wasn't just the sheer number of people that was impressive. Tikal's rulers were the masterful architects of a sprawling metropolis, complete with imposing pyramids, palaces, and a ball court where you definitely didn't want to be on the losing team. The city was a marvel of innovation, a testament to the Mayan knack for urban planning. But here's the kicker. Tikal wasn't just about building big and looking pretty. The rulers of Tikal were political strategists, weaving alliances and rivalries like they were knitting a particularly complex sweater. Now, enter Calakmul, Tikal's arch-nemesis. Situated in the heart of the Mexican state of Campeche, Calakmul was Tikal's equal in grandeur and ambition. The two cities were like heavyweight boxers, sizing each other up, occasionally throwing punches, and always looking for an opening to deliver a knockout blow. This rivalry wasn't just about who had the tallest pyramid or the most elaborate headdresses. It was about control of trade routes, influence over lesser city-states, and ultimately, legacy. The tension between Tikal and Calakmul was palpable, their conflict spanning centuries, and involving an intricate web of alliances and betrayals. Picture a chess game where the pieces are real people, and the stakes are as high as the pyramids themselves. The rulers of these cities were more than just figureheads. They were strategists, warriors, and occasionally the ancient equivalent of reality TV stars, their lives a blend of spectacle and substance. And speaking of spectacle, let's talk about the rulers themselves. These kings weren't just sitting on their ornate thrones, basking in the glory of their cities. They claimed divine right, asserting that they were chosen by the gods to rule, a claim that was as much a political strategy as it was a religious belief. The Mayan kings were the original masters of branding, presenting themselves as the earthly embodiment of divine will. Their reigns were marked by elaborate ceremonies, part political theater, part religious ritual, designed to reinforce their status and keep any dissenters in check. Imagine a royal ceremony in Tikal. The king, adorned in jaguar skins and jade jewelry, presides over a bloodletting ritual. It's a scene straight out of a historical drama, with a dash of the macabre. The king would pierce his skin, offering his blood to the gods in a dramatic display of devotion. The crowds, perhaps awed or maybe just terrified, watched as the ruler reaffirmed his divine connection. It was a powerful statement, reinforcing the idea that the king was not just a man, but a conduit to the divine, a living link between the gods and the people. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. The life of a Mayan king wasn't all ceremonies and divine proclamations. There were practical implications to their reigns, decisions that could mean the difference between prosperity and ruin. Rulers had to manage resources, negotiate with neighboring city-states, and occasionally lead their people into battle. And in a world where alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm, a king's tenure could be as precarious as it was prestigious. Now, let's tackle the myth of the all-powerful, benevolent king. Sure, the imagery is compelling, but the reality is more nuanced. These rulers often found themselves caught in the crosshairs of ambition and obligation. They had to maintain the delicate balance of power, keeping their subjects in line while fending off rival city-states. And let's not forget the ever-present threat of internal dissent. In a world where power was as much about perception as it was about actual control, a ruler's greatest challenge might have been managing their own image. As the political landscape evolved, so did the tactics of these kings. Warfare became a tool of diplomacy, with battles serving as both a means to an end and a theater for demonstrating power. Victories were celebrated not just as military triumphs, but as divine endorsements of the king's rule. Defeats, on the other hand, were a little trickier to spin. But hey, when you're claiming divine right, a little creative storytelling is par for the course. In the grand tapestry of Mayan history, the rise of city-states like Tikal and Calakmul was as much about the personalities of their rulers as it was about their architectural achievements. These leaders were not just figureheads. They were the architects of their city's fortunes, the strategists behind every alliance and conflict. They were the stars of their own political drama, a saga that played out in the jungles of Central America long before the first script was penned in Hollywood. So, as we continue to unravel the intricacies of this ancient civilization, let's remember that the story of the Maya is not just one of stone and stucco. It's a story of people, of ambition and power, of triumphs and tragedies. The Maya left more than just ruins in the jungle. They left a legacy of innovation and intrigue, a testament to the complexities of human nature and the enduring allure of power. And with that, we've only scratched the surface of the Mayan political world. There's more to uncover, more layers to peel back, and more stories to tell. So stay tuned, because this ancient epic still has plenty of surprises in store. As we dive back into the vibrant world of the Maya, let's swivel our gaze to the cultural marvels that made this civilization not just a powerhouse of politics and trade, but a beacon of intellectual and artistic achievement. The Maya were not just content to build empires and wage wars. They wanted to understand the cosmos, write their histories, and leave a mark that would outlast the jungles that enfolded them. First, on our cultural tour, let's talk about the Mayan writing system, a complex web of hieroglyphs that would make any cryptographer break out in a cold sweat. The Maya developed one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the pre-Columbian Americas, using over 800 distinct glyphs to record everything from royal lineages to astronomical observations. To put it in perspective, this wasn't just a few symbols scratched on stone. It was a full-fledged language, rich in nuance and detail. And let's be real, deciphering these texts today is like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube in the dark. The Maya carved their stories into stone stelae and painted them on codices made from bark paper. These weren't just everyday musings or sharping lists. They were epic tales of gods and kings, cosmic cycles, and the occasional scandal, because who doesn't love a bit of royal gossip? But here's the kicker. A lot of these texts were destroyed during the Spanish conquest, leaving us with tantalizing fragments of a much larger narrative. It's like finding just a few pages of a gripping novel and being left to imagine the rest. Now, let's shift our gaze skyward to the Mayan achievements in astronomy. These folks were the original stargazers, meticulously charting the movements of celestial bodies with an accuracy that would make even NASA blush. They observed the planets and stars, developing complex calendars that were as precise as they were intricate. Their solar calendar, the Harb, consisted of 365 days, just like ours, but with a twist. It was divided into 18 months of 20 days each, plus a 5-day period at the end that was considered unlucky. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a Friday the 13th marathon. But the piece de resistance of Mayan calendar systems was the long count, a cycle that spanned 125 years. Yes, you heard that right. This wasn't just a calendar. It was a cosmic clock, keeping time with astronomical precision. It was this very calendar that fueled the modern myth of the 2012 apocalypse, a misunderstanding of Mayan timekeeping that had doomsday preppers stocking up on canned beans and bottled water. Spoiler alert, the world didn't end. The calendar just reset, like a cosmic odometer rolling back to zero. While we're myth-busting, let's tackle the idea that the Maya were obsessed with predicting the end of the world. Sure, they were fascinated by cycles of time and cosmic events, but they didn't have a red phone to the apocalypse hotline. Their calendars were about understanding and synchronizing with the natural world, not forecasting doom. It's like assuming a car manual predicts the end of the vehicle just because it details its workings. Now, onto something that will make your inner math nerd do a happy dance: Mayan mathematics. These ancient mathematicians were using concepts that wouldn't pop up in Europe until centuries later. They had a base 20 decimal system and were one of the first civilizations to use the concept of zero, a revolutionary idea that gave their calculations precision and flexibility. Imagine trying to do your taxes without zero. It would be a nightmare, yet the Maya mastered this concept, using it to track astronomical events and support their complex calendar systems. And let's not forget their architectural prowess, testament to their engineering genius and aesthetic sensibility. Those towering pyramids, more than just Instagrammable monoliths. They were carefully aligned with celestial events, serving both religious and astronomical purposes. Take El Castillo at Chichen Itza, built so that during the equinoxes, the setting sun casts a shadow of a serpent slithering down its steps. It's like a cosmic light show, minus the pyrotechnics. The Maya didn't just build up, they built out, creating sprawling cities with intricate water management systems and grand plazas that served as the beating heart of urban life. These were places where society came together to trade, worship, and yes, occasionally settle scores. Their cities were as much about function as they were about form, a blend of practicality and grandeur that would give our modern urban planners a run for their money. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of it all. Building these monumental sites required a workforce and resources that demanded careful management. Laborers, many of whom were likely pressed into service, toiled under the hot sun, cutting and hauling stone with tools of wood and stone. It's a reminder that behind the awe-inspiring facades was a society grappling with the practicalities of resource allocation and social organization. As we unravel the threads of Mayan culture, it becomes clear that their legacy is one of complexity and contradiction. They were astronomers and architects, warriors and riders, their achievements as diverse as the jungles that surrounded them. The Maya were not just builders of cities, but artisans of time and space, leaving behind a tapestry of stone and story that continues to captivate us. So as we pause in our exploration of this extraordinary civilization, let's marvel at the ingenuity and ambition that define the Maya. Their story is far from over, and as we continue to weave through the fabric of their history, there are still countless discoveries to be made. Stay tuned, because the journey is just beginning, and there's so much more to uncover in the world of the Maya. And so, as we gallop through the annals of Mayan history, it's time to tackle the elephant in the rainforest, the decline of this once mighty civilization. The fall of the Maya is a tale as tangled and layered as the vines that engulf their abandoned cities. And spoiler alert, there's no single villain to blame. Instead, think of it as a perfect storm of internal strife, environmental hiccups, and that timeless classic, external pressures. Let's first contemplate internal strife, or as we might call it today, office politics on a grand scale. The Mayan city-states were like a family reunion where no one really got along. Rivalries that had been simmering for centuries occasionally boiled over into full-blown warfare. Remember Tikal and Calakmul? Their centuries-long rivalry was more than just a spat over property lines. It was a battle for supremacy that drained resources and sapped the will of their people. Internal conflicts weren't just about prestige. They were about survival, and unfortunately, they were costly in both human and economic terms. Then there was the environment, Mother Nature being her unpredictable self. Around the end of the Classic period, roughly 900 CE, the Maya faced severe droughts that would have made even the most optimistic weather forecaster throw in the towel. The irony. All those sophisticated water management systems that had previously turned the jungle into a land of plenty couldn't handle this prolonged dry spell. Crops failed, cities couldn't sustain their populations, and the intricate web of agricultural and trade networks began to unravel. It was the ancient version of a supply chain disaster, minus the frantic emails. Now throw in external pressures for good measure. The arrival of new groups, possibly drawn by the allure of Mayan wealth, added another layer of complexity. These newcomers weren't exactly welcomed with open arms. They brought new challenges to the already beleaguered city-states, forcing the Maya to stretch their resources even thinner. It's like dealing with an unexpected house guest when you're already struggling to pay the rent. So, was it the Mayan penchant for warfare, or Mother Nature's cruel sense of humor, or perhaps the constant threat of new arrivals at the door? The answer is all of the above. The decline wasn't a single catastrophic event, but a slow, painful fade. Cities that had once thrived became ghost towns, their inhabitants scattering to smaller, more sustainable settlements. The great stone pyramids and palaces were left to the jungle, which obligingly swallowed them up, as if trying to erase any trace of human hubris. But let's not romanticize the fall too much. The collapse wasn't just a tragic end, it was a transformation. The Maya didn't vanish into thin air, they adapted. They moved to areas with better water resources, like the northern Yucatan Peninsula, where cities like Chichen Itza rose to prominence. The Maya civilization was like a phoenix, not so much reborn from ashes as reshaped by necessity. Now, let's zoom out and think about the lessons from this ancient tale. The Maya's story isn't just about grand cities and cosmic calendars. It's a stark reminder of the fragility of human achievement. They show us that no matter how advanced a society becomes, it's still at the mercy of its environment and its own internal squabbles. It's a cautionary tale for any civilization, ancient or modern, that overreaches or ignores the limits of its environment. In a world where climate change is the hot topic, pun intended, the Maya offer a sobering perspective on the consequences of ecological neglect. Yet, despite their decline, the legacy of the Maya endures. Their calendar systems, mathematical innovations, and architectural marvels continue to inspire awe and curiosity. Their story is etched in the stones of their cities, and in the living descendants who still inhabit the region, preserving their language and traditions. The Maya remind us that human ingenuity is as enduring as it is fragile. Let's debunk a few lingering myths while we're here. The fall of the Maya wasn't some apocalyptic event, nor was it a result of alien intervention. Sorry, conspiracy theorists. The decline was a complex interplay of factors, a testament to the multifaceted nature of history itself. It's easy to romanticize the past, to see the Maya as mystical seers or tragic heroes. But the truth is more compelling. They were people capable of great brilliance and equally great mistakes. In the end, the Maya left behind more than just ruins. They left a legacy of resilience and adaptation. Their civilization may have faded from its former glory, but their influence is woven into the fabric of Mesoamerican culture and beyond. Whether it's in the intricate patterns of a woven textile or the rhythms of a traditional dance, the Maya live on, a testament to the enduring power of human creativity. So, as we wrap up this journey through the rise and fall of the Maya, let's remember that history is not just a series of dates and events. It's a story of people, of societies striving for greatness, falling, and rising again. The Maya remind us that while civilizations may crumble, the human spirit endures, always reaching, always exploring, and always leaving a mark on the world. And with that, dear listener, we've reached the end of our exploration, but rest assured, the echoes of the Maya's story will continue to resonate, challenging us to learn, to question, and to marvel. In the sprawling heart of Eurasia, where the winds of the steppes whisper secrets of ancient conquests, lay the colossal Mongol Empire, a territory so vast it made modern-day shipping conglomerates look like mom-and-pop delivery services. At its peak in the 13th and 14th centuries, the Mongol Empire stretched from the edges of Europe all the way to the Sea of Japan, a staggering 9 million square miles. To put that into perspective, that's about 3 times the size of the United States today. This was the land of Genghis Khan and his descendants, who carved their domain not with a scalpel but a sledgehammer, uniting disparate tribes into an empire that set the stage for one of history's most formidable trade networks. Before we get too far, let's bust one of those romanticized myths. The Mongols were not just marauding horsemen with a penchant for pillaging. Sure, they knew how to swing a sword and take a city, but they were also savvy politicians and shrewd economists. They understood that a wealth of goods was as crucial as a wealth of territories. This understanding fostered a trade network that rivaled any modern global enterprise, except the Mongols didn't have customer service hotlines. They had arrows. The geography of the Mongol Empire was a mixed bag of terrains, each offering its own set of challenges and resources. To the north, Siberian forests. To the south, the arid expanse of the Gobi Desert. The steppes, with their endless grasslands, were both a highway and a barrier. Moving across these vast expanses was no small feat. We're talking about journeys that took weeks, if not months, depending on the weather, and let's be honest, the weather wasn't exactly cooperative. Traversing the steppes meant navigating a landscape that was both as flat as a pancake and as unforgiving as a tax audit. Enter the Silk Road, not so much a single road as a sprawling network of trade routes that connected the east and west like an ancient version of the internet. The Silk Road was the Mongols' golden ticket to economic supremacy. It wasn't just silk that traveled these paths. It was a veritable shopping list of luxury goods, spices, textiles, precious metals, and even ideas and technologies. The Mongols didn't just facilitate trade, they actively protected it. They offered traders something akin to the world's first shipping insurance policy. Pay a tax, get the Mongol army as your personal bodyguard. Pirates of the steppes, not on their watch. Now, let's talk logistics. Moving goods across the Silk Road was no Amazon Prime 2-day delivery. Caravans were the name of the game, long trains of camels, horses, and yaks plodding across the desert, laden with goods. A typical caravan might travel around 20 miles a day, weather permitting. If you were lucky, you'd make the 4,000-mile journey from China to the Mediterranean in about a year. And don't even get me started on the paperwork. Well, papyrus work, but you get the idea. The Mongols understood the importance of infrastructure, too. They established way stations known as yam every 20 to 30 miles along major routes. These were like ancient truck stops where travelers could rest, resupply, and catch up on the latest empire gossip. The Mongols even had a version of the Pony Express, a relay system that allowed messages to whisk across the empire faster than you could say Silk Road. But it wasn't just about moving goods. The Silk Road was a cultural exchange highway, a corridor through which art, religion, and technology flowed with the goods. Think of it as the world's first viral content platform. Gunpowder, paper, the compass, all these innovations traveled westward, changing the course of history. In return, the East got its fair share of Western ideas and inventions. It was globalization before globalization was cool. So why did the Mongols bother with trade when they could have just taken what they wanted? Simple: sustainability. Conquest is costly, and empires have a nasty habit of overextending. By fostering trade, the Mongols ensured a steady revenue stream that fueled their war machine and kept their empire humming. It was the ancient version of diversifying your portfolio. Smart, right? Of course, this isn't to say the Mongol trade network was all smooth sailing. Bandits, natural disasters, and the occasional outbreak of plague were occupational hazards. But the Mongols were nothing if not adaptable. They implemented laws that standardized weights and measures, making trade more reliable and less likely to devolve into a medieval version of let's argue about the size of this silk bolt. In summary, the Mongols didn't just conquer the world, they connected it. Their trade networks laid the groundwork for the economic globalization we know today. So, next time you order that must-have gadget from halfway across the globe, spare a thought for the Mongol traders who, in their own way, were the original pioneers of global commerce. Just don't expect them to offer free returns. And speaking of pioneers, the Mongols didn't just stop at connecting the world, they put a toll booth on it. Think of the Mongol Empire as the world's largest conglomerate with a universal membership fee. Want to cross their lands? Better have your taxes ready. Sure, the Mongols were formidable warriors, but their real ace in the hole was economics. They mastered the art of monetizing trade routes before it was cool, turning the Silk Road into a veritable cash cow. Now, here's where things get spicy. The Mongols were effectively the world's first customs officers. Forget those long lines at the airport. Imagine waiting at the borders of a vast empire for your goods to be inspected by a band of nomadic horsemen. While the Mongols didn't have modern-day scanners or sniffer dogs, they had something much more persuasive: control over thousands of miles of trade routes. They weren't just collecting tolls, they were ensuring the safety of merchants, goods, and by extension, their empire's income. The Mongols implemented a clever system of taxation that was as efficient as it was lucrative. They demanded a flat rate on goods passing through their territory, a sort of medieval value-added tax. This wasn't just a money grab, it was a strategic move to encourage trade while filling their coffers. The result? A steady stream of revenue that kept their empire well-oiled and battle-ready. In essence, the Mongols had cracked the code on how to make war pay for itself. But how did they manage such a sprawling enterprise without modern technology? Simple: logistics. The Mongols were logistical wizards, and their relay station system, known as the Yam, was their ace in the hole. Imagine a series of well-stocked outposts stretching across the empire, each ready to provide fresh horses and supplies to messengers and traders. It was like Amazon Prime, but with more hooves and fewer algorithms. This network allowed for the rapid movement of information and goods, a critical factor in maintaining control over their vast empire. The Yam system was a logistical marvel that put medieval Europe to shame. With relay stations every 20 to 30 miles, the Mongols could send messages across their empire at breakneck speeds. Riders, often equipped with a medallion as a sort of imperial badge, would gallop from one station to the next, swapping exhausted horses for fresh ones. This ensured that news and orders could be transmitted swiftly, keeping the empire connected and responsive. In terms of efficiency, the Yam was the medieval equivalent of a fiber-optic network. Of course, the Mongols had their fair share of challenges. Maintaining such a vast network was no small feat. The Yam required a constant supply of horses, provisions, and personnel, a logistical headache that would make even the most seasoned supply chain manager wince. But the Mongols were nothing if not resourceful. They tapped into the vast resources of their empire, commandeering horses from conquered lands and employing locals to staff the stations. It was a system that was as brutal as it was efficient, and let's not forget the human element. The Mongols understood that an empire is only as strong as its people, and they were masters of managing human resources. They implemented a system of rewards and incentives to ensure loyalty among their subjects. Merchants who paid their taxes were often granted protection and privileges, creating a mutually beneficial relationship between the empire and its traders. It was a delicate balance of power that kept the wheels of commerce turning. But the Mongols weren't just about the bottom line. They also had a knack for cultural diplomacy. By fostering trade, they inadvertently became patrons of cultural exchange. As goods moved along the Silk Road, so too did ideas, technologies, and beliefs. It was a melting pot of cultures and innovations, with the Mongols serving as the unlikely stewards of progress. They may not have set out to be the architects of globalization, but their trade networks laid the groundwork for a more interconnected world. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Bandits, natural disasters, and the occasional outbreak of plague were constant threats to the stability of trade routes. But the Mongols were nothing if not adaptable. They implemented strict laws to ensure the safety of travelers and goods, and their reputation as fierce warriors served as a powerful deterrent to would-be bandits. In a world where might often made right, the Mongols were the ultimate enforcers. The Mongol Empire was a paradox, a brutal military machine that also served as a catalyst for trade and cultural exchange. They say necessity is the mother of invention, and the Mongols, driven by the need to sustain their empire, became the unintentional pioneers of global commerce. In their quest for power, they inadvertently connected the world, creating a legacy that would resonate through the ages. So, the next time you swipe your credit card or track a package across continents, spare a thought for the Mongols, the ultimate road warriors who turned the world into their personal toll road. They may have been ruthless conquerors, but they were also shrewd economists, visionaries who saw the potential in connecting disparate lands and peoples. And while they may not have offered free returns, they certainly knew how to keep the goods flowing and the world turning. But let's not get too cozy in the saddle, because the Mongols didn't just ride roughshod over territories. They waltzed into them with a political finesse that could make a modern diplomat sweat. While they could certainly swing a sword, they also wielded treaties and alliances like artisan-crafted daggers, sharp, precise, and oh so effective. Take Genghis Khan, for example. This guy wasn't just a conqueror. He was the Steve Jobs of empire building, envisioning a connected world long before the internet made it trendy. His approach was simple: make friends before making enemies. He understood that a lasting empire needed more than brute force. It required cooperation. The Mongols turned conquered foes into allies, offering them positions within the Mongol ranks. It was a bit like saying, "Join us, or you're toast," but with more sophistication and less butter. Now, here's the kicker. When the Mongols rolled into a new territory, they didn't just flatten it and move on. They assessed its value first. If the locals had something to offer, be it strategic location, valuable resources, or, let's face it, a good tax base, the Mongols played nice. They knew that a well-managed alliance was better than a pile of rubble. Take the city of Samarkand, for instance. Instead of razing it to the ground, they embraced it as a vital hub in their empire, harnessing its resources and manpower to fuel their expansion. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't just some Kumbaya moment of mutual respect. The Mongols were calculating, and their diplomacy had strings attached. In exchange for protection and trade opportunities, they demanded loyalty and tribute. It was the medieval equivalent of a protection racket, only with more horsemen and fewer cement shoes. Yet it worked. Many leaders chose to submit rather than face the Mongol juggernaut, and this strategy of selective leniency allowed the empire to grow without constant bloodshed. One of the best examples of this political savvy was the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace. Sounds like an oxymoron, right? But for nearly a century, the Mongols managed to maintain stability across their vast dominions. This wasn't just luck. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of alliances, treaties, and sheer intimidation. With the Silk Road under their control, they created a safe corridor for merchants and travelers. In return, these traders brought wealth, culture, and innovation into the empire, turning it into a melting pot of ideas and goods. The Mongols' talent for diplomacy extended to their choice of administrators. They often appointed local leaders to govern on their behalf. a move that ensured smoother transitions and minimized resistance. This was a masterstroke in multicultural governance. By allowing conquered peoples to retain a sense of identity, the Mongols avoided the costly rebellions that often doomed other empires. It was as if they'd stumbled upon the secret source of empire management. Keep the locals happy, and they'll keep the tax revenue flowing. And let's not forget the role of marriage alliances. The Mongols were not above using matrimonial ties to cement political relationships. Genghis Khan's descendants married into various royal families across Asia and Europe, creating a web of alliances that bolstered Mongol influence. It was diplomacy by matrimony, and it worked wonders. These unions were more than political theater. They were strategic moves designed to secure the Mongol legacy and prevent potential uprisings. Of course, this isn't to say the Mongols were saints. Their version of diplomacy often came with an ultimatum. Refusal to cooperate meant swift and often brutal consequences. But the genius of their strategy lay in their ability to balance fear with opportunity. They offered their subjects a choice: join our empire and prosper, or resist and face obliteration. It was a simple, albeit ruthless, calculus that kept their empire intact. Now, let's sprinkle a bit of reality on this romantic narrative. The Mongols weren't just forward-thinking visionaries, they were also pragmatists. They recognized that a multicultural empire was more resilient and economically viable. By incorporating different cultures and technologies, they strengthened their empire and ensured its longevity. This wasn't some altruistic endeavor, it was smart business. Diversity meant access to a broader range of skills, knowledge, and goods, which translated to greater power and wealth. But let's bust another myth: the idea that the Mongol Empire was a cultural utopia. While it's true that they facilitated cultural exchange, this was more a byproduct of their trade networks than a deliberate policy. The Mongols were opportunists, not idealists. They didn't set out to create a multicultural empire. They simply saw the value in leveraging diverse talents to maintain their dominance. So, what's the takeaway here? The Mongols weren't just bloodthirsty conquerors. They were masterful politicians who understood the importance of alliances and diplomacy. They turned conquest into business, transforming their empire into a bustling hub of trade and cultural exchange. Their ability to adapt and integrate different cultures laid the groundwork for a surprisingly multicultural empire, one that thrived on the very diversity that other empires shunned. In the grand tapestry of history, the Mongol Empire stands as a testament to the power of political savvy and strategic alliances. They didn't just conquer lands, they connected them, creating a network of trade and diplomacy that reshaped the medieval world. And while their methods were often brutal, their legacy is one of connection and cooperation, a reminder that even the fiercest warriors understood the value of a good business deal. So, next time you marvel at the globalized world we live in, tip your hat to the Mongols, the original masters of the art of the deal. The Mongols, those supposed barbarians, were actually the unlikely patrons of a cultural renaissance that swept across Asia like a wildfire with a penchant for art and enlightenment. Forget the image of them as mere marauders. These folks were the early adopters of cultural exchange, and they did it with the finesse of a Silicon Valley venture capitalist spotting a unicorn startup. Let's kick things off with a dose of reality. While Genghis Khan and his merry band of horsemen were busy expanding their empire, they inadvertently sowed the seeds of a cultural boom. How, you ask? Well, they weren't just about swinging swords. They also knew the value of a well-placed brushstroke or a pithy scroll. In fact, their empire became a melting pot of cultures, a veritable Pan-Asian renaissance that would make even the Medici family jealous. Take, for instance, the city of Karakoram, the Mongol capital established in 1220 by Genghis Khan himself. It wasn't just a military outpost. It was a cultural hub that attracted scholars, artisans, and traders from all over the known world. Think of it as the ancient world's Silicon Valley, minus the overpriced coffee shops and electric scooters. Karakoram was the place to be if you were an artist or intellectual looking to make a name for yourself. The Mongols welcomed talent with open arms, which is ironic considering their reputation for closing them around necks. And let's not forget their patronage of the arts. The Mongols may have been fierce warriors, but they were also keen appreciators of beauty and craftsmanship. They supported artisans like a modern-day Kickstarter campaign, funding projects that ranged from intricate textiles to elaborate metalwork. These weren't just vanity projects. They were a strategic move to showcase the empire's wealth and sophistication. The Mongols understood that cultural prestige was just as important as military might, and they wielded it like a finely crafted sword. But here's where things get really interesting. The Mongols didn't just hoard the cultural riches of their empire, they shared them. Under the Pax Mongolica, the Silk Road became a highway of ideas as much as goods. Technologies like printing and gunpowder flowed from east to west, while Western musical instruments and architectural styles made their way eastward. It was a two-way street of innovation, and the Mongols were the traffic cops ensuring everything moved smoothly. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of it all. The Mongols weren't content with just ruling a vast empire. They wanted to leave a mark that would endure through the ages, and they did just that by fostering an environment where cultural exchange thrived. This wasn't some happy accident. It was a deliberate strategy to cement their legacy and demonstrate their empire's sophistication to the world. Of course, it wasn't all silk and sunshine. The Mongols' support for the arts and scholarship came with strings attached. They expected their subjects to contribute to the empire's glory, and those who failed to produce results often found themselves out of favor, or worse. But for those who succeeded, the rewards were substantial. The Mongols granted land, titles, and wealth to those who impressed them, creating a system of patronage that incentivized innovation and excellence. And let's not ignore the role of religion in this cultural exchange. The Mongols were remarkably tolerant of different faiths, a pragmatic approach that allowed them to rule over a diverse and often fractious population. They invited religious leaders to their court, engaging in theological debates and encouraging a spirit of intellectual inquiry. This wasn't just an exercise in tolerance. It was a way to keep the peace and prevent religious strife from tearing the empire apart. Now, let's debunk another myth, the idea that the Mongols were uncultured brutes. In reality, they were astute observers of human nature and understood the power of culture to unite and inspire. They saw the value in preserving the knowledge and traditions of the peoples they conquered, believing that a diverse cultural heritage was a strength, not a weakness. It was a lesson that many empires before and after them failed to grasp, and one that contributed to the Mongols' enduring success. But let's not get carried away with romanticizing the Mongols as benevolent patrons of the arts. They were still conquerors, and their empire was built on the backs of those who fell before their armies. Yet, in their quest for domination, they stumbled upon the secret to cultural longevity, fostering an environment of exchange and innovation. It might not have been their original intention, but it became one of their most enduring legacies. So, what's the takeaway here? The Mongols were more than just marauding horsemen with a knack for conquest. They were the accidental architects of a cultural renaissance, a testament to the power of diversity and the exchange of ideas. They may not have set out to create a Pan-Asian renaissance, but they did, and the world is richer for it. As we continue to explore the legacy of the Mongol Empire, let's remember that even the fiercest warriors can be unlikely patrons of progress. So, the Mongols, those unexpected patrons of progress, left us with a legacy that's as complicated as a modern art piece you're pretending to understand at a gallery opening. They didn't just conquer and plunder, they built bridges, metaphorically and literally, across continents. But what happens when the dust settles, the empire crumbles, and the horsemen ride off into the sunset? Well, the echoes of their achievements linger, and in true Mongol fashion, they leave us with lessons as sharp as a Genghis Khan-edged sword. Let's start by acknowledging that the Mongols were not just the Steve Jobs of empire building, but also the accidental inventors of globalization. They stitched together vast swaths of land with trade routes that made the Silk Road the medieval equivalent of a data superhighway. Forget about the internet. The Silk Road was the OG of connectivity, bringing goods, ideas, and occasionally the odd plague from one end of the map to the other. The Mongols didn't invent trade, but they were the ones who gave it a turbo boost, ensuring that your next shipment of silk or spices was less likely to be intercepted by bandits and more likely to make it to your doorstep, or rather, your tent flap. But let's not get too misty-eyed with admiration. The Mongol Empire, for all its achievements, was as stable as a soap opera relationship. It rose and fell with the predictability of a reality TV show's ratings. By the late 14th century, the empire splintered into several khanates faster than you can say dynastic squabble. The cracks that appeared were largely due to the classic pitfalls of empire: overextension, internal strife, and the inability to keep a diverse population happy with just promises of prosperity and the occasional Mongol-sponsored arts festival. The lessons here are as relevant today as they were back then. The Mongols showed us the power of connectivity, proving that trade and cultural exchange can be as potent as any military campaign. They taught us the importance of infrastructure. Those way stations, or yam, were the medieval world's version of rest stops, essential for keeping the empire running smoothly. And they were early adopters of the service economy model, offering protection in exchange for taxes, a precursor to modern public goods financing. But they also remind us that an empire, or a multinational corporation, can only stretch so far before it snaps. Sustainability wasn't just a buzzword they ignored, it was their Achilles heel. However, the Mongols weren't just about trade and logistics. Their political savvy, their way of turning former enemies into allies, offers a masterclass in diplomacy. They made alliances not out of love but necessity, understanding that a bit of politeness and a few strategic marriages could save a lot of arrows. It's a lesson in realpolitik that resonates with the modern world, where diplomacy often involves more handshakes than hand grenades. But let's burst another romantic bubble: the notion that the Mongol Empire was a paradise of multiculturalism and tolerance. Sure, they were more open-minded than many of their contemporaries, but this was less about cumbaya and more about practical governance. When you're ruling a territory that makes the modern EU look like a neighborhood watch group, you need to keep the peace. The Mongols understood that diverse cultures could coexist under their rule, as long as everyone remembered who was in charge. And while they might have encouraged religious freedom, they weren't above using it as a tool for control, playing different sects off against each other to maintain dominance. History loves a good paradox, and the Mongols deliver it in spades. They were destroyers and builders, tyrants and patrons, ruthless yet unexpectedly progressive. Their empire was a complex beast, and its legacy is a reminder that history isn't just black and white. It's a swirling mass of contradictions, much like trying to explain why you still watch reality TV despite knowing better. As we wrap up this jaunt through the Mongol Empire's legacy, let's reflect on the human element. The Mongols were a testament to the power of adaptability. They conquered vast lands not just with military might, but with a willingness to learn, adapt, and innovate. It's a lesson that echoes through time. The ability to pivot, whether in business, politics, or life, is as crucial as any grand strategy. They didn't just pave the Silk Road. They laid the foundations for a world that values connectivity and exchange. So, the next time you ponder the tangled web of modern globalization, remember the Mongols. They were the original disruptors, the ones who took a sledgehammer to the status quo and reshaped the world in their image. Their story is a kaleidoscope of ambition and strategy, of conquest and culture. And while their empire may have faded into history, their impact remains, a testament to the enduring power of vision and the inevitability of change. As for their reputation as bloodthirsty conquerors, well, let's just say it's complicated, just like any good Facebook relationship status. In the heart of South America, the Andes rise like Mother Nature's own impassable wall, stretching over 500 miles and daring anyone to cross them. And yet, nestled within this vertiginous landscape, the Inca Empire emerged as one of history's most remarkable feats of human engineering and organization. Between 1438 and 1533, the Incas transformed from a small highland tribe into the architects of an empire that spanned from modern-day Ecuador to the edges of northern Chile. No small feat when your kingdom's foundation is literally a mountain range. Now, conquering those mountains was akin to a toddler scaling Everest. Ambitious, improbable, but somehow the Incas managed it. They were like the original extreme sports enthusiasts, minus the GoPro. Speaking of which, let's not forget the real MVP of their empire-building escapade, the llama. Yes, the humble llama, both pack animal and fashion statement. While the European knights were busy lugging armor on horses, the Incas had llamas doing the heavy lifting. Picture it, an empire built on the sturdy back of a llama, the Inca equivalent of a U-Haul minus the mileage fees. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. The Inca's extraordinary rise starts with a man named Pachacuti, a name that, let's be honest, sounds like a winning Scrabble move. Before he came along, Cusco was less the glittering heart of an empire and more the small-town kid dreaming of the big leagues. Enter Pachacuti, who didn't just step into power. He exploded onto the scene like a rock star with a vision. Under his leadership, Incas embarked on a building spree that would make even modern urban developers blush, transforming Cusco into a sprawling metropolis that became the empire's political, cultural, and religious center. Now, Pachacuti didn't just wake up one day and decide to build an empire. He was a strategic genius. First, he capitalized on the Andes' natural defenses, turning what could have been an insurmountable obstacle into a protective fortress. But he didn't stop there. He saw the potential to unite the diverse groups scattered across this rugged landscape under a single banner, and not just through brute force. Sure, there was plenty of conquering, but it was the Inca policy of integrating conquered peoples that really turbocharged their expansion. The Incas were masters of cultural diplomacy, offering peace and prosperity in exchange for allegiance to their empire, a deal that was hard to refuse when the alternative was, obliteration. The empire's rapid expansion wasn't just about military might and smart politics. It was also about logistics, and here the Incas truly shone. They constructed an incredible network of roads, nearly 25,000 miles worth, that wound through mountains and valleys, creating the backbone of their empire. These roads weren't just dirt paths either. They were carefully engineered with drainage systems, retaining walls, and bridges that could rival Indiana Jones' wildest adventures. This infrastructure allowed for efficient communication and movement of armies, resources, and yes, more llamas than you could shake a stick at. As the empire stretched its borders, the Incas faced the challenge of uniting a patchwork of cultures and languages. Enter Quechua, the lingua franca imposed across the empire. While it wasn't exactly Rosetta Stone, it was a unifying force that helped knit together this vast and varied empire. Plus, it made administrative tasks like taxation and record-keeping slightly less of a headache. Speaking of taxation, the Incas had a unique system that didn't involve gold coins, but rather labor. The meter system required each citizen to contribute work to the state, whether it was farming, weaving, or, you guessed it, road building. It was like a compulsory national service, minus the benefits package. Yet despite their achievements, the Incas were not immune to the human condition. Their society was marked by stark inequalities, with a rigid class system that placed the emperor, known as the Sapa Inca, at the top, believed to be a living god. Below him were the aristocrats, priests, and military leaders, while the common folk, the Micmac, did the heavy lifting. This hierarchy was as steep as the Andes themselves, and just as unyielding. However, let's not forget the romantic myths that often paint the Incas as benevolent rulers of a peaceful utopia. The truth was more complex. The empire's expansion was often brutal, with resistance met by swift and harsh punishment. The Incas could be as ruthless as they were resourceful, and their legacy is as much about domination as it is about innovation. The empire's downfall, hastened by Spanish conquistadors, was a brutal reminder of the fragile nature of even the most impressive civilizations. As we continue this 5-part journey through the wonders of Inca architecture and ingenuity, keep in mind the duality of their achievements. They were as much a testament to human capacity for greatness as they were a lesson in the impermanence of power. So, the next time you find yourself marveling at the ingenuity of Machu Picchu or the sprawling expanse of the Inca road system, remember the llamas, the meter, and the man with the unforgettable name, Pachacuti, who dared to dream big in the high altitudes of the Andes. And speaking of Pachacuti's grand legacy, let's dive into one of his most breathtaking creations, Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu, the crown jewel of Inca engineering and possibly the most photogenic ruin on Instagram. Perched at a staggering 970 feet above sea level, this ancient city is like the Ed Sheeran of historical sites, universally adored, yet shrouded in a certain enigmatic aura. First, let's talk about its location. Machu Picchu sits astride a narrow ridge between two Andean peaks, Machu Picchu and Huayna Picchu. This wasn't just a case of Pachacuti playing the ultimate game of real estate monopoly. Its strategic position offered both a natural fortress and a stunning panorama that could make even the most jaded traveler swoon. Whether it was meant as a royal retreat, a religious site, or a super-fancy agricultural experiment, the jury's still out. But its placement was no accident. It's like they had Google Maps centuries before it existed. Now, let's address the alien conspiracy theories head-on. Yes, the stonework is mind-bogglingly precise. It's so perfect that you couldn't slip a credit card between the stones. But before you cue up your favorite sci-fi soundtrack, let's give credit where credit is due, to the Incas' engineering prowess. They mastered a technique called ashlar masonry, which involved fitting stones together without mortar. Talk about craftsmanship. These guys were the original DIY gurus, minus the YouTube tutorials. And here's a little party trick. Machu Picchu's stones were quarried and transported uphill without the wheel. That's right, no wheels. The Incas relied on sheer manpower, leveraging sloping plains, and possibly a few choice llamas to get the job done. Imagine the logistical nightmare this might have been. Yet they pulled it off, leaving us with a structure that's withstood centuries of weathering and the occasional tourist stampede. But let's not get carried away romanticizing. While the idea of a lost city hidden away in the clouds is the stuff of legends, the reality was less mysterious and more about clever urban planning. Machu Picchu wasn't an isolated wonder, but part of a vast network of Inca sites connected by roads and trails that would make even the most ambitious city planner swoon. These roads, known as Quhapac Nyan, spanned over 25,000 miles. That's enough to circle the globe. Almost. They linked the empire's farthest reaches, from the arid plains of Chile to the lush jungles of the Amazon basin. The Quhapac Nyan was the lifeblood of the empire, facilitating trade, military movements, and communication. Picture it, an ancient superhighway, complete with stone paving, drainage ditches, and suspension bridges that would make modern civil engineers cry. And they did it all without GPS or a single traffic cone. The roads were so advanced that they've been declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So if you ever find yourself grumbling about potholes, remember the Incas might have a thing or two to teach about infrastructure. But back to Machu Picchu. The site's orientation wasn't just for the views. It was aligned with important astronomical events. The Intihuatana stone, for instance, functioned as an astronomical clock, helping to mark the solstices. It's like Stonehenge meets Swiss watch precision. The Incas were keen astronomers, and their understanding of celestial phenomena informed their agricultural calendar, ensuring crops were planted at just the right time. Economically, Machu Picchu was a testament to the Incas' resourcefulness. Terracing allowed them to farm on steep slopes, maximizing arable land in an otherwise challenging environment. These terraces also served as a sophisticated drainage system, preventing landslides and erosion. It was an agricultural feat that kept the city self-sustaining, a necessary trait when your nearest Inca Costco was a multi-day trek away. And what of the labor that went into constructing such a marvel? Cue the meter system again. This labor tax had citizens contributing their skills to state projects, from stone carving to road building. It was like a compulsory volunteer program, ensuring the empire's infrastructure projects were always on schedule. While the system was efficient, it also highlighted the empire's social stratification. The common folk bore the brunt of the workload, a reality that's far less romantic than the picturesque ruins would suggest. Speaking of myth-busting, let's tackle the idea of Machu Picchu as the lost city of the Incas. It wasn't lost so much as it was forgotten by the Western world, until Hiram Bingham stumbled upon it in 1911, despite locals knowing about it all along. That's right, Bingham wasn't exactly Indiana Jones. He was more like the guy who finally decided to stop and ask for directions. The rediscovery of Machu Picchu sparked a wave of fascination with the Incas, but it also brought about the removal of countless artifacts. Many of these treasures were carted off to Yale University, sparking a century-long debate over cultural patrimony. It's a reminder that the allure of lost civilizations often comes hand in hand with the complex realities of cultural heritage and ownership. As we ponder Machu Picchu and its place in history, let's not forget the Incas' ingenuity wasn't confined to this one site. Their architectural feats were spread across the Andes, each structure a testament to their ability to adapt and thrive in a challenging environment. Yet, despite their achievements, the Incas couldn't withstand the onslaught of Spanish conquistadors, whose arrival in the 16th century marked the beginning of the end for this great empire. So, what's the takeaway from this mountaintop marvel? The Incas were masters of their domain, blending engineering, astronomy, and art to create a legacy that would endure long after their empire fell. But as we admire their handiwork, remember it's not just about the stones and terraces. It's about the people who envisioned and built them, laboring under a system that was as demanding as it was innovative. Machu Picchu stands as a monument to human ingenuity and resilience, a reminder that great feats often require great sacrifices. And as we delve deeper into the architectural wonders of the Inca Empire, keep in mind the dual nature of their accomplishments, a blend of beauty and brutality, innovation and inequality. But for now, let's marvel at Machu Picchu, a testament to what can be achieved when vision meets determination, even if it involves dragging a ton of stone up a mountain without a single wheel in sight. And speaking of feats that make you question the human spirit's endurance threshold, let's dig into the nitty-gritty of how the Inca Empire maintained its sprawling grandeur without a single jackhammer or spreadsheet in sight. We're talking about an empire that managed to flourish in the Andes, a place so steep and rugged that even mountain goats need a rest day. Yet, the Incas thrived, not by magic, but through meticulous organization and a labor system that's more efficient than a Swiss watch. Enter the meter system, the Incas' version of a labor tax, which sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare until you realize it was the backbone of their empire-building strategy. The meter required every citizen to contribute labor to state projects, from constructing those iconic roads to tilling the emperor's fields. Imagine it as a mandatory national service, except instead of posting selfies in uniform, you're hauling stones up a mountain. The genius of the meter system lay in its communal approach. Everyone pitched in, making it less about exploitation and more about collective achievement, at least in theory. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality was that the common folk bore the brunt of the workload, while the elite sat back, probably sipping on chicha and overseeing operations. It was a system that kept the empire humming along, but it also highlighted the social stratification as stark as the Andes themselves. While the Sapa Inca and his entourage enjoyed the spoils of labor, the average worker was lucky to get a day off before the next project beckoned. The meter was efficient, sure, but it was also a reminder that the empire's brilliance was built on the backs of its people. Speaking of efficiency, let's not forget the quippers. Those quirky knotted strings that might look like a craft project gone wrong, but were actually an ingenious solution for record-keeping in a society that hadn't quite gotten around to inventing the written word. Quippers were the Incas' version of Excel spreadsheets, before Excel was a glimmer in Bill Gates' eye. These knotted strings allowed them to keep track of everything from census data to tax obligations, ensuring that the empire ran like a well-oiled machine. The Quipu system was a stroke of genius in a pre-literate society. Each knot represented different numbers, and the cord's colors and placements could signify various categories. Think of it as the original data science, minus the algorithms and flashy graphics. The Incas used quippers to record everything from military logistics to agricultural output, allowing them to manage their vast empire with remarkable precision. Yet, while these knotted strings were a marvel of innovation, they also underscore the empire's reliance on a complex bureaucracy that required constant upkeep. Now, what made the quippers truly fascinating was their flexibility. They were adaptable, capable of evolving to meet the empire's growing demands. In a world where change is often met with resistance, the quipper stood as a testament to the Incas' ability to innovate and adapt. But as with everything, there was a downside. The system relied heavily on the quipucamearchs, the specialized keepers of these records. Lose them, and you risked losing the empire's collective memory, a precarious situation for any civilization. But let's zoom out for a moment. The Inca Empire wasn't just a marvel of organization and logistics. It was an economic powerhouse that thrived on its ability to mobilize resources with military precision. Their economy wasn't based on currency, but on the redistribution of goods, a concept that might sound like a utopian dream today, but was a practical reality back then. The state collected surplus goods and redistributed them to ensure that communities could weather lean times. It was a system that fostered a sense of unity and shared purpose, even as it reinforced the empire's hierarchical structure. The economy was further bolstered by the network of roads that snaked through the Andes, connecting distant regions and facilitating trade. These roads weren't just for moving armies or llamas laden with goods. They were the arteries that fed the empire, allowing for the swift exchange of ideas, culture, and technology. Yet, this interconnectedness came at a cost. Maintaining such an expansive network required constant labor and oversight, a burden that fell squarely on the shoulders of the meter workforce. And here's where the story gets a little dark. While the empire's infrastructure and organization were second to none, they were also a double-edged sword. The same systems that enabled the Inca to build a mighty empire also made it vulnerable to external threats. When the Spanish arrived, they exploited these very networks and systems to their advantage, turning the Incas' strengths into weaknesses. It's a sobering reminder that even the most robust systems can be undone if they fall into the wrong hands. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. The Incas' achievements were nothing short of extraordinary, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. They built an empire that thrived in one of the most challenging environments on Earth, creating a legacy that continues to captivate us today. Yet, as we marvel at their achievements, it's essential to remember the human cost of such endeavors. The empire's grandeur was built on a foundation of relentless labor and sacrifice, a reality that's often overshadowed by the romanticized myths of a lost civilization. As we continue our journey through the architectural wonders of the Inca Empire, keep in mind the dual nature of their accomplishments. They were as much a testament to human capacity for greatness as they were a lesson in the impermanence of power. So, the next time you find yourself marveling at the ingenuity of Inca engineering, remember the meter, the quippers, and the people who made it all possible. It's a story of ambition and innovation, but also of the harsh realities that come with building an empire in the mountains, without a single home depot in sight. And speaking of harsh realities, stay tuned as we explore the social and cultural dynamics that shaped the Inca Empire. From the role of religion in everyday life to the complex relationships between different regions and peoples, there's still much to uncover about this remarkable civilization. Just remember, history is as much about the people who lived it as it is about the structures they left behind. So let's keep digging deeper, uncovering the layers of history that make the Inca Empire such a fascinating and enduring subject. As we continue our dive into the architectural wonders of the Inca Empire, let's pause to appreciate the political and social machinery that powered this incredible civilization. Because let's face it, building an empire that stretches over an area of nearly 770,000 square miles isn't just about stacking stones precisely. It's about the Sapa Inca, the living guard king, and his entourage of scheming nobles, savvy diplomats, and the occasional ruthless general. This wasn't a casual Sunday DIY project. It was a masterclass in imperial administration. The Sapa Inca, literally the only Inca, was the empire's beating heart, orchestrating a symphony of builders, soldiers, and statesmen from his high-altitude throne. He was seen as a divine being, the earthly son of Intai, the sun god, which is a pretty solid gig if you can get it. This celestial endorsement wasn't just for show. It lent legitimacy to his rule and made his word law. You can bet that when the Sapa Inca said jump, the entire empire asked, how high, and should we build a road there while we're at it? Now, what set the Incas apart was their unique blend of diplomacy and force. While the conquistadors might have you believe the Incas were all about clubbing people into submission, the truth is a shade more complex. Yes, they could be as persuasive as a sledgehammer, but they also had a knack for diplomacy that would make modern politicians envious. When a new region was brought into the fold, it wasn't just through the clash of arms. The Incas offered a tempting package: protection, prosperity, and a share in the empire's wealth. Of course, refusal to join the Inca Club wasn't really an option unless you fancied a swift and brutal lesson in the art of persuasion. This dual strategy of diplomacy and dominance was crucial for managing a patchwork of cultures and languages. And here's where the brilliance of the Sapa Inca's bureaucracy shone. The administration was as tight as a drum, with local leaders, curakas, integrated into the Inca hierarchy. They acted like regional managers, ensuring that the empire's policies trickled down to even the most remote communities. It was a classic case of keeping your friends close and your potential rebels closer, a strategy that worked until it didn't. Thanks, Pizarro. But let's not forget the spiritual underpinnings that influenced how the Incas built their world, literally. The empire's architectural feats were as much about reaching for the heavens as they were about controlling the earth. The Incas believed their sacred sites were points of connection between the earthly realm and the divine. These weren't just places of worship. They were cosmic junctions where the guards could pop down to check on the empire's latest roadworks. Take the sacred city of Cusco, for instance. It was designed in the shape of a puma, a powerful symbol in Inca mythology. The city wasn't just a political nucleus, but a cosmological one, with each building reflecting the empire's divine order. The Incas saw their capital as the navel of the world, the spiritual epicenter from which the empire radiated. It's a bit like calling your hometown the center of the universe, but with less irony and more stone masonry. The Incas' architectural ambitions were also heavily influenced by their cosmology. They aligned temples and structures with astronomical events, believing that these connections enhanced their spiritual power. The Temple of the Sun in Cusco, for example, was a marvel of solar alignment. During the solstices, sunlight would fill the temple in a sacred light show that even Spielberg would envy. It was a reminder to the people that their leaders were divinely endorsed, a cosmic seal of approval visible in every stone. Yet, while the spiritual significance of these sites is awe-inspiring, let's not get lost in the incense smoke. The romanticized view of Inca spirituality often glosses over the practical realities. Yes, these sites were divine, but they were also political powerhouses. Temples and sacred places served as centers of administration, where priests doubled as bureaucrats, ensuring the empire ran smoothly. Think of it as a divine DMV, where offerings to the gods were as important as filing your paperwork on time. And speaking of paperwork, remember those quippers. They made another appearance here, too. Priests and administrators alike relied on these knotted strings to keep track of offerings, festivals, and celestial events. It was a blend of spirituality and bureaucracy that kept the Inca Empire ticking like the most punctual sundial. Of course, we can't talk about Inca spirituality without addressing the darker side. Human sacrifices were part of their religious practices, a grim reality that shatters the idyllic image of a peace-loving society. These sacrifices were intended to appease the gods, ensure fertility, and maintain cosmic balance. It's a reminder that behind the polished stones and sacred geometry lay a harsh reality, a society where divine favor was sometimes bought with blood. And here's the kicker. The Incas' religious practices were also a tool of control. By integrating the gods of conquered peoples into their pantheon, the Incas not only expanded their spiritual influence, but also cemented their political power. It was a stroke of genius. Worship your gods under our roof, and everyone's happy, or else. As we untangle the threads of Inca spirituality and governance, it becomes clear that their achievements were a complex tapestry of belief and pragmatism. The Incas were architects of not just stone and mortar, but of a society that balanced the divine with the bureaucratic. Their legacy is one of monumental ambition, a civilization that reached for the stars while keeping its feet firmly planted in the Andes. Yet, as we marvel at their ingenuity, we must remember the empire's dual nature, a blend of reverence and ruthlessness, spirituality and subjugation. The Inca Empire was a testament to human capacity for both greatness and folly, a reminder that the line between the sacred and the secular is often as thin as a mountain air, and just as difficult to navigate. With the stage set for the grand spectacle of the Incas' rise and fall, there's more to explore in this saga of ambition and empire building. As we continue our journey, keep in mind that the Incas' architectural wonders were more than just stone and structure. They were the embodiment of a civilization's soaring aspirations and its inevitable vulnerabilities. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the intricacies of Inca society, where every stone tells a story, and every myth has a reality lurking in its shadow. As the curtain falls on the Inca Empire's grand narrative, it's hard not to marvel at the sheer audacity of their accomplishments. Yet, like every good drama, the story of the Incas has a twist that no one saw coming, or rather, no one could have predicted just how swiftly the tables would turn. Enter the Spanish conquistadors, a ragtag bunch of fortune-seekers led by Francisco Pizarro, who, with fewer than 200 men, managed to topple an empire that had flourished for over a century. Talk about an underdog story, if underdogs had muskets and a questionable moral compass. But before we get carried away with visions of swashbuckling conquistadors, let's set the record straight. It wasn't just Spanish steel and strategy that brought the mighty Incas to their knees. The real game-changer was an invisible adversary, disease. Smallpox, measles, and other European illnesses swept through the Andean highlands like a viral wildfire, decimating the Inca population faster than you can say epidemic. These diseases did more conquering than any cavalry charge, wiping out an estimated 90% of the native population. The Incas, who had never encountered such pathogens, were defenseless, and their societal structures crumbled as the epidemic spread. Now, let's talk about Pizarro, a man whose ambition was as towering as the Andes themselves. In 1532, he captured the Inca Emperor Atahualpa in a surprise attack during the Battle of Cajamarca. Atahualpa, the last Sapa Inca, was held for ransom, a staggering amount of gold and silver that would make even the most seasoned pirate blush. Despite the Incas delivering the largest ransom in recorded history, Pizarro executed Atahualpa anyway. The Spanish played dirty, and it paid off. With their emperor gone and diseases running rampant, the Inca Empire was like a ship without a captain, adrift in a sea of chaos. But here's the kicker. The fall of the Incas wasn't just a result of Spanish cunning or European germs. It was also a story of internal strife. The empire was already teetering on the edge of a civil war between Atahualpa and his brother Huascar, each vying for the throne. This familial feud left the Incas divided and weakened, providing the Spanish with the perfect opportunity to swoop in and claim victory. It's a classic case of divide and conquer, made easier when the division is already gift-wrapped and delivered to your doorstep. So, what do we make of this tumultuous tale? The Inca Empire's downfall is a stark reminder of how even the most robust civilizations can unravel when faced with unforeseen challenges. It's a lesson in vulnerability, a reality check that power can be as transient as the morning mist over Machu Picchu. Yet, even in their downfall, the Incas left an indelible mark on history, their architectural wonders standing as a testament to their ingenuity and resilience. Fast forward to the present, and the legacy of Inca architecture continues to captivate the world. Machu Picchu, with its breathtaking vistas and enigmatic allure, draws over 1.5 million visitors annually. It's the crown jewel of Peru's tourism industry, a pilgrimage site for globetrotters and Instagrammers alike. But beyond the selfie sticks and souvenir stalls lies a deeper truth. The Incas were masters of sustainable architecture. They built cities that worked with the landscape, not against it, using techniques that minimized environmental impact long before green building became a buzzword. Inca structures were designed to withstand the test of time and the wrath of nature. Their sophisticated drainage systems and terracing techniques prevented erosion and landslides, ensuring that their cities remained stable amidst the Andes' seismic activity. It's a lesson in harmony and balance, one that modern architects would do well to heed as we grapple with the challenges of climate change and urbanization. The Incas understood that the key to sustainability lay in respecting the natural environment, a philosophy that's as relevant today as it was 5 centuries ago. Moreover, the Inca emphasis on community-driven projects offers valuable insights for contemporary society. Their success was built on the collective effort of their people, a testament to the power of collaboration and shared purpose. In a world that's increasingly fragmented, the Inca model of unity and cooperation serves as a poignant reminder of what can be achieved when we work together for the common good. It's a call to action for modern communities, to build not just for ourselves, but for future generations. As we wrap up this journey through the architectural marvels of the Inca Empire, it's worth reflecting on the enduring mystique that surrounds these ancient builders. Their legacy is a complex tapestry of innovation and dominance, spirituality and pragmatism. The Incas remind us that history is not just a record of the past, but a lens through which we can view the present and shape the future. Their story is both a cautionary tale and an inspiration, a reminder of the heights humanity can reach and the depths we can fall. In the end, the Inca Empire's grandeur and downfall are a testament to the human spirit's capacity for greatness and folly. As we stand in awe of their achievements, let's carry forward the lessons they left behind, to build with care, to lead with vision, and to remember that even the mightiest empires are, at their core, human. So, as you drift off into dreamland, let your thoughts linger on the echoes of the Incas, the architects of an empire in the clouds, whose stones continue to speak across the ages. The ancient Celts, a name that conjures images of wild, paint-smeared warriors, mysterious druids, and of course, plenty of tartan. But hold your horses, or your Celtic war chariots, because we're about to unravel this tangled tapestry of history that's a bit more than just kilts and mysticism. The Celts were a diverse group of tribal societies that roamed Europe like the original backpackers, but with more swords and fewer travel blogs. Let's first set the scene for our tale. The Celts weren't a monolithic group of people who woke up one day, decided to don matching plaid skirts, and start a band. No, these folks were spread far and wide across Europe, from the windswept isles of Ireland and Britain to the sun-dappled plains of what we now call France, back then known as Gaul. By around 500 BCE, the Celts had managed to pitch their metaphorical tents across a vast territory stretching from the Iberian Peninsula all the way to the fringes of Eastern Europe. Imagine trying to organize a family reunion with that crowd. Now, you might be wondering why the Celts seem to have an identity crisis, teetering between Irish and French influences. Well, it's because they were both, and neither. The migration patterns of the Celts were less like a straight line and more like a Jackson Pollock painting, chaotic, vibrant, and open to interpretation. They moved in waves, with new tribes splashing onto the European canvas like a rather aggressive form of nomadic art. Some scholars suggest that climate changes, overpopulation, and the allure of new lands were the driving forces behind these movements. It turns out that even in ancient times, people were eager for a change of scenery. The Celts' penchant for fierce independence was legendary. These folks weren't exactly fans of centralized authority. Think of them as the ultimate DIY enthusiasts, each tribe fiercely autonomous and often more inclined to argue with their neighbors than to join forces. They were like a rock band constantly on the verge of breaking up, but somehow the music kept playing. The Celts' lack of political unity might have made them easy pickings for the eventual Roman conquest, but it also allowed for a vibrant mosaic of cultures and traditions to flourish. Now, let's sidestep into the socio-political dynamics of Celtic society, because nothing screams excitement like ancient tribal politics. The Celts were a warrior society, which means if you were a Celt, there was a good chance you knew your way around a sword, or at least pretended to during tribal gatherings. Their society was hierarchical, with kings or chieftains at the top, backed by a noble class that wasn't afraid to swing a sword or two. Below them were the common folk, who probably spent their days farming, crafting, and wondering if they'd ever get a promotion. But let's not forget the Druids, the rock stars of Celtic society. These were the guys who claimed to have a hotline to the gods and a knack for natural law. Druids were the Celtic version of Swiss Army knives, serving as priests, teachers, and legal experts. They were also the keepers of sacred knowledge, which they guarded like a mother bear with her cubs. Julius Caesar, who had a bit of a Celtic obsession, or perhaps a Celtic problem, wrote that the Druids hold all the knowledge of the world. Whether that was true or just Caesar trying to impress his Roman pals with tales of his adventures is up for debate. The Celts had a curious relationship with the supernatural, and their religious beliefs were as colorful as their history. They worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses, often associated with natural elements like rivers, trees, and mountains. Some sources suggest that they believed in the transmigration of souls, a celestial game of musical chairs where the soul would hop from one body to another after death. It's a comforting thought, especially if you fancied the idea of coming back as a noble warrior rather than a humble farmer. And while we're on the topic of reincarnation, let's debunk a common myth. The Celts didn't invent Halloween, but they did have Samhain, a festival marking the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter. It was a time when the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead was said to be thinnest, which sounds both thrilling and slightly terrifying. Picture it as the ancient Celtic version of a horror movie marathon, but with real spirits instead of CGI ghosts. Before we wrap up this first dive into the Celtic world, let's acknowledge the elephant, or perhaps the wild boar, in the room. The idea that the Celts were these noble savages untouched by the corruption of civilization. In truth, they were as complex and contradictory as any other ancient society. They had their fair share of internal conflicts, territorial squabbles, and yes, even a love for finery and gold. So, as we prepare to journey further into the world of the ancient Celts, remember this. They were not just warriors, druids, or figures in historical tapestry. They were a dynamic and diverse people, thriving in their independence and chaos, shaping the cultural landscape of Europe in ways that still echo today. And as we dig deeper, we'll uncover more than just the romantic myths and heroic tales. We'll delve into the gritty, fascinating reality of the Celtic way of life, one historical nugget at a time. Stay tuned, because the Celts are just getting started. Now, let's shift our focus to the enigmatic Druids, those robed figures of Celtic lore who could make or break a chieftain's career faster than you can say, sacrificial Oak Grove. These guys were the original influencers, long before TikTok and Instagram made it cool. Forget about swaying public opinion with a catchy hashtag. The Druids had something much more potent, the spiritual and social power to shape their world. Picture this. A Celtic chieftain, on the cusp of going into battle, consulting his local druid about the prospects of victory. The druids were the gatekeepers of divine favor, and their blessing or curse could mean the difference between returning home a hero or not returning at all. It was a high-stakes game, and the druids held all the cards, or in their case, the sacred mistletoe. The druids were a multifaceted bunch, acting as priests, philosophers, judges, and teachers. They were the Swiss army knives of ancient Celtic society, with a spiritual hotline to the gods and an encyclopedic knowledge of natural law. Their influence was such that even the mighty Julius Caesar, who wasn't exactly a fan, had to admit that these guys were a big deal. In his Commentarii de Bello Gallico, Caesar described the Druids as holding all the knowledge of the world. Hyperbole, maybe, but it highlights the reverence and fear they inspired. One of the most intriguing aspects of Druidic tradition was their love affair with oak trees. These towering giants of the forest weren't just a backdrop for Druidic rituals, but sacred symbols in their own right. The word druid itself is thought to derive from the Celtic word for oak and knowledge. Talk about being tree huggers before it was trendy. The Druids believed that oak trees were the dwelling places of gods, and their groves were natural cathedrals where the divine and earthly realms intersected. Now, let's not romanticize the Druids too much. While they were undoubtedly spiritual leaders, their rituals weren't all peace, love, and harmony. Some accounts suggest that the Druids practiced human sacrifice, though how much of this is fact and how much is Roman propaganda is up for debate. The Romans, particularly Caesar, had a vested interest in painting the Druids as barbaric to justify their conquest of Celtic lands. It's the ancient equivalent of a smear campaign. However, archaeological evidence does indicate that animal sacrifices were a part of Druidic rites, so it's possible that human sacrifices weren't entirely out of the question. Rituals aside, the Druids were also educators. They were the guardians of oral tradition, passing down knowledge through generations without ever writing it down. This was both a practical and philosophical choice. By keeping their teachings oral, the Druids ensured that their knowledge was accessible only to those deemed worthy, preserving the sanctity of their wisdom. It's like having the ultimate secret club, where the membership benefits included spiritual enlightenment and the occasional political maneuvering. Speaking of politics, Druids wielded considerable influence in the power dynamics of Celtic society. A Druid's blessing could legitimize a chieftain's rule, while their curse could spell political ruin. They were kingmakers in robes, navigating the murky waters of tribal politics with a deftness that would make Machiavelli proud. In fact, The Druidic knack for political strategy was so profound that some chieftains kept Druids close as advisors, not just for spiritual guidance, but for their sharp insights into human nature and tribal diplomacy. But what really made the Druids stand out was their ability to connect with both the common folk and the noble class. They were mediators, bridging the gap between the spiritual and the mundane, the divine and the earthly. It was a role that required not just wisdom but charisma, and the Druids had both in spades. Their influence extended far beyond the spiritual realm, impacting the social and political fabric of Celtic society. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the Druids' legacy. While their rituals and teachings may seem shrouded in mystery, their impact is undeniable. They were the original influencers, shaping the course of Celtic history with a deft touch and a reverence for the natural world that resonates even today. Their legacy is a testament to the power of spiritual leadership and the enduring allure of mystery. As we continue our journey through the world of the ancient Celts, we'll uncover more about these fascinating figures, exploring their rituals and beliefs in greater depth. But for now, let's leave the Druids to their oak groves and sacred rites, with the promise that we'll return to their world soon enough. The Celts have many more stories to tell, and we're just getting started. As we leave the Druids to their oak groves, let's now leap into the vibrant, chaotic realm of Celtic mythology. Picture a world where gods and goddesses had more drama than a season finale of Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but plus a whole lot of shapeshifting. These deities weren't just sitting around with harps and halos. They were busy weaving epic tales and causing all sorts of divine mischief. And believe me, their stories would make even Thor and Loki take notes. The Celtic pantheon was as vast as it was colorful. We're talking about a sprawling cast of characters, each with their distinct quirks and backstories. Take Lug, for instance. Known as Lug of the Long Arm, this god was the Swiss army knife of the Celtic world, skilled in arts, crafts, and warfare. He was like the celestial overachiever who could do everything, leaving mere mortals feeling like they were barely scraping by with their one marketable skill. Lug's festival, Lugnasad, celebrated on August 1st, marked the beginning of the harvest season, a time to party, feast, and occasionally watch your crops get trampled by dancing villagers. Then there's Brigid, the goddess of healing, poetry, and smithcraft. She embodied the trifecta of Celtic spirituality, where art, health, and industry were intertwined like a Celtic knot. Her presence was so influential that when Christianity swept through the lands, Brigid was cleverly morphed into Saint Brigid, ensuring her legacy endured. Talk about a divine rebranding. Of course, we can't discuss Celtic mythology without mentioning the Morrigan, a goddess of war, fate, and death. Imagine a supernatural powerhouse with a penchant for shapeshifting into crows. Her presence on the battlefield was like a bad omen wrapped in a mystery. She was the original harbinger of doom, and her name alone could send shivers down the spine of any warrior. Yet her role wasn't just to scare people silly. She represented the inevitable cycle of life and death, a reminder that even in victory there is loss. Shapeshifting, in fact, was a recurring theme in Celtic mythology. And why wouldn't it be? The ability to transform into beasts, birds, or other beings reflects the Celts' deep connection with nature and their belief in the fluidity of life. It was a cultural metaphor for adaptability and resilience, qualities that were crucial for a people constantly adapting to the whims of nature and the tides of conquest. Speaking of adaptability, let's address the elephant, or perhaps the giant boar, in the room. The idea that these myths were just fanciful stories spun around campfires. Sure, they had entertainment value, but they also served as a social glue, binding communities with shared narratives that explained the world around them. These tales provided moral guidance, cultural identity, and even political commentary. When a chieftain likened himself to a god like Lug, it wasn't just ego. Well, maybe a little, but a strategic move to legitimize his rule. Now, let's debunk a common misconception. The Celts weren't just making these stories up as they went along. Their mythology was an oral tradition, meticulously passed down through generations by bards and druids. This wasn't a game of ancient telephone where details got lost. It was a disciplined practice ensuring that each story retained its core elements while allowing for regional variations. So next time someone tells you the Celts didn't take their myths seriously, remind them that these tales were the backbone of Celtic culture, as integral as the sword and shield. In the grand tapestry of Celtic mythology, the gods weren't distant, aloof beings. They were intimately involved in the lives of the people, offering protection, demanding respect, and sometimes just enjoying a good brawl. Their stories were meant to inspire, to caution, and to entertain. In a world where the line between the human and the divine was as thin as a veil, these myths were as real as the mist on a Celtic morning. The cultural significance of these myths can't be overstated. They weren't just bedtime stories for children. They were the cultural currency of the Celtic world, rich with symbolism and depth. Each tale was a reflection of the values, fears, and hopes of people who saw the world as a living, breathing entity. As we continue our journey through the enchanting, and occasionally bewildering, world of Celtic mythology, remember that these stories are more than just relics of the past. They are windows into the soul of a civilization, offering glimpses of a time when gods walked the earth, and every river, hill, and forest held its own sacred story. Stay tuned, because the Celts have many more tales to tell, and we're just getting started. Let's light up the Dark Ages with some Celtic festivities, shall we? These folks sure knew how to throw a party that made New Year's Eve look like a quaint afternoon tea. Their calendar was peppered with festivals, each one an excuse for a bonfire that could probably be seen from orbit. It's no wonder the Celts were considered a lively bunch. When your year is punctuated with celebrations, who wouldn't be? Let's start with Samhain, the granddaddy of all Celtic festivals. Celebrated on October 31st, it was essentially the Celtic New Year's Eve, marking the end of the harvest season and the start of the dark, cold winter. The Celts believed that on this night, the veil between the living and the dead was thinner than an anorexic ghost. Spirits could wander the earth, and not just the Casper kind. We're talking about ancestors coming back to say hi, or maybe give you the stink eye if you forgot to tend their graves. To ward off any malevolent spirits, the Celts would light massive bonfires and wear costumes, a tradition that echoes in today's Halloween festivities. So, next time you're donning that questionable cat costume, remember that you're part of a tradition dating back over 2 millennia. Now, Samhain wasn't just about spooks and spirits. It was a practical affair too. The festival was a time for communities to prepare for the winter, a season that could be more brutal than a Game of Thrones winter. Livestock was brought in from the pastures, and the weakest animals were slaughtered to conserve resources. In a society where survival was a roll of the dice every winter, Samhain was both a celebration and a strategic move. Fast forward to Beltane, celebrated on May 1st, when the Celts flipped the script from winter woes to springtime revelry. Beltane marked the beginning of the pastoral summer season, and it was all about fertility and growth. Think of it as the ancient Celtic version of a farmer's market opening day, but with more fire and fewer artisanal cheeses. The festival featured bonfires so large they could roast marshmallows from a mile away. Cattle were driven between these fires to purify them and ensure fertility, a ritual that probably left the cows wondering if they'd stumbled into a druidic rave. What's more, Beltane was a time for matchmaking and merrymaking. Young couples would jump over the flames to ensure a prosperous union, which seems like a risky way to test your relationship. But hey, we're not here to judge. In fact, Beltane was so infused with passion and playfulness that it inspired the tradition of May Day celebrations across Europe. So, next time you're dancing around a maypole, remember that you're not just twisting ribbons, you're channeling the spirit of Celtic exuberance. Then there's Imbolc, celebrated on February 1st, which was basically the Celtic version of Groundhog Day. It signaled the first signs of spring and was dedicated to the goddess Brigid. This was a time for cleansing and purification, and the Celts would light fires in her honor to chase away the lingering darkness of winter. Imbolc was less about partying and more about preparing for the agricultural year ahead. It was a spiritual deep clean, if you will, a chance to shake off the winter blues and get ready for the busy planting season. Let's not forget Lughnasadh, celebrated on August 1st, which was Lug's festival and marked the start of the harvest season. Named after the multi-talented god of light, truth, and the arts, Lughnasadh was a communal event where everyone pitched in to gather the first fruits of the harvest. It was a time for feasting, games, and athletic competitions that would put your average office picnic to shame. The festival, celebrated the bounty of the earth, and it was a chance for communities to come together in gratitude and camaraderie. Now, if you're wondering about the economic side of things, these festivals weren't just frivolous affairs. They were crucial to the social and economic fabric of Celtic life. Each celebration provided an opportunity for trade, a network of gift-giving, and alliances that were as vital as any written contract. If you wanted to seal a deal or negotiate a trade, doing so over a Beltane bonfire was more effective than any boardroom meeting. Festivals also played a political role. They were occasions when leaders could demonstrate their generosity and prowess, a public relations stunt before PR was even a thing. Hosting a successful festival could boost a chieftain's status, while a poorly executed one could lead to whispers of incompetence. It was a high-stakes social game, and the bonfires were more than just for warmth. They were beacons of political ambition. But let's not romanticize too much. While these festivals were filled with joy and community spirit, they were also reminders of the harsh realities of Celtic life. Samhain's bonfires were a reminder of the long, hard winter ahead. Beltane's flames a plea for fertility and prosperity, and Lugnasad's feasts a celebration of survival. In a world where life could be as unpredictable as the weather, these festivals were not just celebrations, but necessary rituals to appease the gods, ensure survival, and maintain social cohesion. So, as we dive deeper into the world of Celtic festivals, remember that these celebrations were more than just ancient shindigs. They were complex events woven into the very fabric of Celtic society, reflecting the values, fears, and hopes of people who understood that life was both fleeting and precious. The bonfires, costumes, and rituals were not just for show. They were expressions of a worldview that saw the world as a tapestry of interconnected cycles and stories. As we wrap up this fiery journey through Celtic timekeeping, one thing is clear. The Celts knew how to throw a party that resonated through the ages. Their festivals were a testament to the resilience, creativity, and communal spirit of people who faced life's uncertainties with a bonfire and a dance. So, the next time you find yourself celebrating Halloween, May Day, or even a harvest festival, tip your hat to the Celts, the original masters of merrymaking. And stay tuned, because there's plenty more to uncover in the fascinating world of the ancient Celts. Just as the Celts were perfecting the art of the bonfire bash, the Romans were busy perfecting the art of empire building, and this clashed like a heavy metal band at a folk festival. The Romans, with their penchant for order, roads, and a good toga, were not exactly the life of the Celtic party, but they were determined to crash it, nonetheless. By the 1st century BCE, Julius Caesar had his eyes set on Gaul, and he wasn't there for the scenery. The Gallic Wars kicked off around 58 BCE and lasted until 50 BCE, a relentless campaign that would bring most of the Celtic tribes in Gaul under Roman control. Now, Caesar's conquest of Gaul wasn't just about expanding the Roman map. It was a political move to boost his own career back home. Politics and warfare in ancient Rome were as intertwined as spaghetti and meatballs. The conquest provided Caesar with wealth, glory, and a loyal army, three things that could make a Roman senator feel invincible. However, for the Celts, it was the beginning of the end for their independent way of life. The Romans were meticulous record keepers, and they left behind a detailed account of their dealings with the Celts. While Caesar might have exaggerated his exploits for dramatic effect, think of him as the ancient world's PR guru. His writings give us insight into the Celtic societies on the brink of transformation. He described the Druids with a mix of respect and condescension, noting their influence, but also painting them as a bit backward compared to Rome's civilized ways. Yet, for all the Roman chest-thumping, the Druids were no pushovers. They wielded significant spiritual and political power, and their resistance to Romanization was as fierce as a Celtic warrior's battle cry. But let's face it, the Romans were not fans of Celtic independence. Their strategy was to dismantle the Celtic social structure, starting with the Druids. The Druids, with their oak groves and mystical rituals, were seen as the intellectual and spiritual heart of Celtic resistance. So, the Romans did what any empire would do when faced with a pesky source of opposition. They outlawed Druidic practices. By the 1st century CE, under Emperor Claudius, Druidism was officially banned within the Roman Empire. It was a classic case of, if you can't beat them, legislate against them. As the Roman grip tightened, Celtic society began to transform. Romanization swept through the conquered territories like a viral meme, bringing with it roads, baths, and the Latin language. The Celts, ever adaptable, began to adopt Roman customs, merging them with their own traditions. This cultural blending was not always harmonious, but it was inevitable. The Romans were experts at practical governance, and they knew that the easiest way to control a population was to seduce it with the perks of civilization. So they built cities like Lutetia, modern-day Paris, and Londinium, London, centers of commerce and Roman culture that dazzled with their sophistication. Yet, even as the Druids' influence waned, Celtic traditions proved resilient. The Romans might have thought they'd extinguished the Druidic flame, but the embers smoldered on. Celtic art, with its intricate designs and symbolic motifs, continued to flourish. The famous Latin style, characterized by swirling patterns and dynamic forms, remained popular in jewelry and metalwork. It was a visual language that spoke of a vibrant culture, blending old ways with new influences. But the Romans weren't the only game-changers in town. As the Roman Empire's grip on Europe began to slip in the 4th and 5th centuries CE, Christianity started its own quiet revolution. Missionaries like St. Patrick and St. Columba spread the Christian faith across the Celtic lands, and by the early Middle Ages, Christianity had taken root. Yet, the transition from paganism to Christianity was not a clean break. It was more like a merge lane on a busy highway, with plenty of honking and confusion. The Christianization of the Celts didn't obliterate their beliefs overnight. Instead, it absorbed and transformed them. Many Celtic gods and goddesses were reimagined as saints. Brigid, the beloved goddess of healing and poetry, became St. Brigid, a revered Christian figure. The Celtic festival of Samhain morphed into All Hallows' Eve, eventually giving us Halloween. Even the Druids, those keepers of ancient wisdom, found a place in the Christian world as monks and scholars, preserving their knowledge in the monasteries of Ireland and Scotland. Despite the changes, the Celtic spirit endured. Their legends, myths, and art continued to inspire, and their legacy lived on in the lands they once roamed. The Celts left behind more than just archaeological relics. They left a cultural imprint that would shape Europe for centuries. Their stories became the foundation of medieval romance. Their art influenced Gothic architecture, and their festivals evolved into the celebrations we know today. So why do we still find the Celts so captivating? Perhaps it's their mystique, the allure of a world where gods walked the earth and druids held sway over kings. Or maybe it's their adaptability, their ability to blend old ways with new, crafting a unique identity that could withstand the tides of change. The Celts remind us of the richness of human culture, the beauty of diversity, and the resilience of traditions in the face of overwhelming odds. As we close this chapter on the Celts, let's tip our hats, or perhaps a horned helmet, to a people who danced with the gods and laughed with the stars. They were warriors and poets, farmers and philosophers, and their legacy continues to echo in the hills and valleys of their ancient lands. The Celts may have been swept away by the tides of history, but their spirit is as enduring as the oak trees they once revered. And as long as there are stories to tell and songs to sing, the Celts will remain a vibrant thread in the tapestry of our shared human heritage.